Parental guidance recommended. This is an original work of fiction. Any similarities to persons or companies living, dead, in operation, and or currently not in operation is purely coincidental. While there are no naughty words, Pudgy suggests parents listen to story first and make decision accordingly whether they can watch this video. If you like this story, please consider pressing the like button. Remember to subscribe so you do not miss out on the next story video. Thank you everyone for your support. The older hare stood at the wheelhouse, his paws on the ship's wheel, and steered to the west. Over the desert they would fly, and through a place the humans called Joshua Tree. Their port of destination was across the park and up the mountains that overlooked the human city of Montclair. With a ship full of supplies and a rotating crew of hares, hedgehog, and owl, the captain knew everything would be all right. Captain Feisty settled in for a long, quiet flight, watching as the moon continued to fill in to a tad past half, full by his estimation. Meanwhile, the human world was falling apart. In a large one-story beige brick building sat a middle-aged human behind a cash register. The lightly tanned man was wearing a Montclair Hospital employee red uniform shirt and beige khaki pants. His cell phone was buzzing constantly on the desk, so he picked it up to see a variety of posts from the various social media platforms that he was on. The disappearances had captivated the nation, and everyday humans were disappearing at an accelerating rate. The United States military was on high alert, especially when planes started to crash out of the sky. The pilots who were flying them disappeared midair, which was a nightmare scenario that the upper echelons of power had never planned for. During a professional baseball game, the entire Pittsburgh roster disappeared during a game with Cleveland. The game was declared a forfeit, but when the news media went to the team ownership for a comment, they found the stadium and its offices wide open with nary a soul to be found. People were starting to panic, and those who could chose to remain home with their loved ones. It was best to spend as much time together as they could, rather than risk losing them while they were away. Those who could not stay home went to work as always, with the knowledge and fear that they may never see their families again. An older blonde woman peered over the man's shoulder and commented, "What exactly is a comics villain?" The man laughed. "Oh, that is my screen name. I have a small online video channel about comic books." The woman giggled and motioned to the phone. "Well, comics villain, put your phone away. The new inventory arrived, and I need it displayed." The man chuckled as he stood up from his plastic chair behind the register and then sidestepped behind the counter. The woman took over at the register and then proceeded to take her phone out to check her social media feeds. The hospital gift shop usually had a steady stream of visitors that ran throughout, but with the events of late, the hospital was very quiet. Comics walked down an aisle with sympathy cards and a blue bunny rabbit. The stuffed animal had been there since he started, and a story was told that the bunny was purchased by a visitor who never came to claim it. Did the visitor pass away? Did they move? Were they taken by aliens? Or did they simply forget? No one knew, and that was part of the allure of the Phantom Bunny. Comics named the Bunny Phantom because it was an idea for a character with lightning fast-jumping powers. He was working on his own comic book, but it was not ready yet. Reaching a set of double doors that were marked "Employees Only," the man pushed them open and headed inside the warehouse. The hospital was all one level, as this area was prone to earthquakes, so thankfully there were no stairs. There was a long hallway that headed around the back part of the cafeteria to the warehouse and receiving dock. Turning a corner, there was a big brown delivery truck parked at one of the garage doors. An African-American gentleman wearing a brown uniform was unloading boxes onto a pallet, waving to the driver. "Hello, Drew. I see you brought the gift shop order." The driver looked up and waved. "Yes, sorry it was delayed. There was a problem at the hub in Los Angeles. Everything got messed up when the warehouse workers disappeared." The hospital worker nodded as he responded, "It is like that here too. The hospital is having trouble staffing the various departments, so every couple hours I leave the gift shop to help the janitors clean. What is going on in this world?" Drew nodded and wiped the sweat from his brow with a white handkerchief before sticking it into his back pocket on his uniform pants. Handing an electronic device to Comics, the hospital worker signed off on the delivery. The delivery driver nodded, pressed some well-worn rubber buttons on the electronic unit, and clipped it back to his belt. "Stay safe, Comics," Drew said with a wave while turning back to the truck to pull down the roll-top door and locked the gate latch shut. Trotting back to the side of the truck, the delivery driver jumped up inside, turned the engine on, and pulled away from the dock in a matter of seconds. Comics waved as the truck left, and then went to get a pallet jack from the side of the loading dock. After a couple adjustments, the man was pushing the empty jack towards the pallet of boxes. The device made a clanging noise as the tines went through the holes of the wooden pallet. After a few pumps with the handle, Comics turned around and began to drag the load of boxes behind him. Running along the hallway were gray public address speakers every 50 feet or so, along with a variety of safety lighting. The speakers all started to crackle at once. All hospital staff, please be advised there continues to be a shortage of available workers. Overtime is being offered for all departments at double time. Please see your available supervisor for further details. Today's lunch special is also fried bologna sandwiches. Meatloaf is canceled because Ethel disappeared. Comics laughed. "Aw man, Ethel's meatloaf is paradise by the dashboard light." A nearby tan janitor in gray coveralls snorted, caught the reference, nodded, and waved as he pushed an overloaded cart of garbage past him. Upon reaching the set of double doors that were marked "Gift Shop," Comics started to open the boxes. Taking inventory of what was received, he read out loud: candy bars, drinks, chips, snack cakes, stuffed animals, cards, comic books, toys. The hospital did not order the good comic books, mainly reprints of Golden Age comics, Super Guy and Nightman from the 40s, and some character he had never heard of before like Piranha Man. Picking up the boxes of the snack foods, Comics pushed his way through the double doors. The gift shop was too warm for his preference, since he was working, but he set about his task. After an hour or so, the shelves were stocked, the boxes were empty on the pallet, and he turned the corner to look at the cash register. His supervisor, a much heavier older man with black round glasses and disheveled hair, was sitting there, looking annoyed as he grumbled. "Where were you? The shop was left empty this entire time." Comics looked confused as he responded. "Karen sent me to the warehouse to get our shipment. I have been restocking the shelves, Mr. Jacobs." The annoyed older man spoke. "When I got here, Karen was not here." "Oh, God." The two men stood in an uncomfortable silence. As both realized what happened, neither said a word, until the loudspeakers rang out again. "The cafeteria will be closing today at 2 p.m. due to lack of staff, and we are out of Bologna." Mr. Jacobs nodded. "Okay, take over and don't disappear. You are staying here till 9 p.m. to cover Karen's shift." Mr. Jacobs waved a hand at his subordinate while he stood and shimmied his way out from behind the counter. As Comics returned to the spot at the register, he sat down and watched the rotund individual waddle off. The subordinate made a face at him behind his back, but didn't mind too much, since the offer of double time had been announced. There was a small LCD flat-panel television set hanging in a corner, set to PNN, which Comics turned up the volume on. The sound of the news filled the gift shop. The disappearances have continued to accelerate, with no explanation from government scientists. The emergency broadcast sound blared as the screen went red with a breaking news banner. As the screen switched quickly to the rose garden of the White House, the president was speaking, flanked by Secret Service and heavily armed soldiers. "Greetings, my fellow Americans. At 2 p.m. Eastern Time, the entire United States House of Representatives disappeared at the same time. Then shortly afterwards at 2:38 p.m. Eastern Time, the United States Senate also disappeared. We do not have an explanation as to what is going on still currently. People seemingly living their normal lives start to exhibit the same symptoms. They do not feel well, start to fade, and then disappear. Using my authority under the Emergency Declaration Section 3.20.4, I am invoking martial law with a nationwide curfew of 8 p.m. local time. I know times like these are tough, but we'll get through. I do not feel so well." Comics started to choke as he swallowed wrong, while his mind raced to process what had just happened live on television. The elderly white man with gray hair clutched at the podium and began to disappear. The soldiers immediately lunged towards the president, only to have their hands pass through his body as what remained of his visage disappeared in a flash of faint white light. Screams and yelling could be heard, just as the camera feed immediately cut off, with a new graphic indicating that the transmission was halted due to national security reasons. Comics was at a loss of words, and quickly changed the channel to see all stations were displaying the national security message. Taking out his phone, the social media platforms were on fire and crashing with activity as the world reacted. Frame-by-frame analysis was being done in real time, trying to figure out what happened. Inevitably, people began to argue whether it was a good thing, while others asked what happened now that the entirety of the federal politicians were gone. That is, until suddenly all cable, fiber, and cellular services all crashed at the same time. Comics watched his phone's cellular signal indicator drop to 0 bars. He started to feel a knot forming in his stomach, and his head started to feel dizzy, while his hands turned translucent as the world faded away. The gift shop went silent, and the register was unmanned once more. Mr. Jacobs had heard his employee shriek and had just returned to watch in horror as comics disappeared. Leaning against a beige-painted concrete block wall, he rubbed his chest. Not him too. We are going to run out of staff. We will need to close the hospital. Outside the walls of the hospital, the military command had ordered the cell phone towers shut down to all but emergency personnel. When the president and the entire Congress had disappeared, the absolute worst-case scenario started to go into effect. But those events were lost upon the delivery driver in the big brown truck. Drew had more deliveries to make, and the truck did not have a radio or air conditioning. He had his doors wide open, which only circulated hot air around him, but the African-American gentleman was used to it. To compensate, the vehicle was moving swiftly and soon made the turn onto 4th Street, because it was the shortest route to Ontario Plaza. It was a strip mall that had a company shipping store, where he would need to pick up packages. Traffic was light, which was unusual since the traffic at this time of day was usually so heavy that he would have to take a side street. Reaching the red light, Drew stopped the truck and watched as people were running in a panic across the crosswalk. "I wonder what is going on," the man said as the light turned green. The right turn signal was activated, and the delivery driver steered right as he pressed the gas pedal. The truck turned down North Mountain Avenue, and soon Drew could see the turning lane for the plaza on the left. Navigating the streets, truck was maneuvered carefully to reach the shipping store that was operated by his delivery company. Pulling into a special parking spot just for the delivery trucks, the gear was placed into park and the engine shut off. The man jumped out of the truck to walk across the covered concrete sidewalk to get to the front door of the brown truck shipping store. Usually there was a cute blonde woman who worked at the store, and she would giggle when Drew would walk in. However, there was no giggle and no blonde woman for that matter. Instead, a gathering of older women was huddled around a television set in the corner and changing channels quickly. "Melinda, it's on." The driver walked up behind the women and made noise to get their attention. One turned around and waved. "Get over here." The president and the entire Congress disappeared. The astonished man blinked and watched as the media networks were playing repeatedly as the elderly president disappeared. Drew coughed hard. When did that happen? The panicked women filled him in, and apparently these events occurred just shortly after he had stopped at another business after the hospital for a pickup. "Hey, turn up the volume and let me pick up the outgoing deliveries. I do not have anything for the store to drop off today." Drew headed around a half counter to a wide flat table that was covered in boxes. Taking a mental note of how many there were, the man started to pick up the small ones first and carried them in his arms, making several trips back and forth between the table and the truck. The gaggle of women were very helpful in relaying the parts of the news broadcast he missed when he was outside. In accordance with the chain of command, the Secretary of State was sworn in as the temporary acting president of the United States. After the ceremony, the remaining reporters all started shouting questions at the newly sworn-in president. The middle-aged, pale-skinned man answered as best as he could, but he was 5 minutes into the big job and had not had any briefings yet. As Drew nodded and started to pick up a larger box that was quite heavy, 2 police officers walked through the door dressed in black uniforms. They were wearing mirrored black sunglasses and had crew-cut hairstyles. The 2 younger officers waved to get the women's attention. "Hello, I am Officer Montoya, and this is Officer Lopez. I am sure you have seen the news. We wanted to let you know that, per order of the governor, the curfew for the state of California will start at 5 p.m. Please close your store and return to your homes." The women turned and listened to the slender Hispanic officers and nodded. Drew looked at Officer Montoya. "I need to return to Baldwin Park to drop off the packages and turn the truck in. Is that all right, officer?" The officer nodded as he stated, "Yes, that is fine. Then return to your home as soon as possible." Drew nodded and then walked past the police officers while carrying a large brown cardboard box. Quickly, the delivery driver exited the store, loaded the boxes, and secured them in the back of his delivery truck. Pulling the roll-top door shut once more and latching it shut, the dark-skinned man trotted around to the driver's side doorsteps. The 2 officers had walked outside, along with the women, and observed as they locked the retail store's doors. Drew waved and then hopped up into the truck and turned it on. Using his electronic handheld device, he registered the pickup. On the LCD display, a message read, "Truck 87, return to CC." The driver nodded and put the vehicle into gear. As Drew carefully drove through the plaza and pulled back out onto North Mountain Avenue, he muttered, "I could take the 10, but at 3 p.m., it would take 4 hours to get there. Okay, I will take the shortcut." The shortcut was in no means short, but the side streets were a lot quicker. Even with the 60 red lights, he would have to stop at along the way. That was the plan, until Drew began to see police barricades set up at key intersections. One by one, the side streets were blocked, so it was becoming clear he would need to get on the highway. Turning back onto San Bernardino Street, Drew drove past the hospital once again. Stopping at a red light, the right turn signal was turned on, since he needed to turn onto Monte Vista Avenue to get to the on-ramp to the highway. As the delivery driver looked in the truck's large rearview mirrors, he saw a police car. When the light turned green, the truck cautiously pulled out and then made the turn. The patrol car quickly sped past him with its lights on, off to chase some other truck today. A sigh of relief escaped his lips as Drew steered the vehicle to follow the road towards the highway's on-ramp. Normally, traffic was heavy, and his truck usually was almost ran off the road every day when he tried to merge. However, today, there were no cars other than emergency vehicles. The GPS intoned that the time of arrival would occur within 19 minutes, and usually that was a lie since it never factored in California people driving. Finally, there was enough wind blowing inside the truck to cool it off, and tightly packed neighborhoods full of buildings passed by on either side of the highway as the truck sped along. Drew turned on the truck's radio and turned up the volume. By order of the United States military and the President and the Governor of California, effective 5 p.m. local time, all residents of the state of California are required to be at their homes. The curfew is for all residents, I repeat. Drew looked down at the hissing radio and it was still on, but the radio transmission was cut at the source. What on earth is happening? The worried man grumbled as he reached down and started to press the radio's channel seek button. Another station turned on, and today in professional football team news, our local team released a statement about the status of the team. The primary and secondary rosters have all vanished, so the third string has been activated. Currently, they do not feel the need to contact the independent leagues for assistance. This is happening league-wide, with reports that the Pittsburgh team has lost everyone. We turn to Jimmy for his take on the day's sporting news. Jimmy is gone. Well, it would appear that, beside the station director and myself, we are the only ones left in the building. Today is not a day for sports. Go home and hug your loved ones. Sports Talk 101 signing off. The radio went to a hiss as the transmission was cut. As Drew continued to search for stations, they were all cut out. The truck was steered towards the right to take the exit lane for exit 32A, since this was the turnoff to get to the distribution hub. Taking the cloverleaf, the increasingly worried man drove past the front of the center and headed to the truck entrance. The distribution center was a nondescript gray warehouse building, with hundreds of large and small trucks backed into the garage door loading docks. Truck 87 was assigned to dock 87, which made driving simple. After taking the familiar path, Drew found his dock and backed the truck up to it. Rubbing his temples, as he put the truck's transmission in park, the engine was turned off once again. Sadly, he could not just go home. The truck had to be unloaded, the deliveries registered, sync up the handheld device with the main terminal, check with dispatch, check with the shift supervisor, take the mandatory learning course of the day, and then Drew could go home. However, due to national emergency, soon the delivery driver saw that normal activities in the warehouse had been cut way back. Many workers had disappeared, and the few remaining ones had already left early. After clocking out for the day, Drew exited the employee section of the warehouse and headed to his gray personal vehicle. The logos had fallen off, as well as several other markings. One of these days, he might fix it, or he may just get a new car. The man had not decided that part yet, and opened the door, which gave a terrific screech. Need to oil that door again when I get back, he muttered as a wave of heat escaped the vehicle, and as he let the car cool off, Drew pulled out his phone. There were no bars of cellular signal, and the data was reading offline. Furrowing his brows, what the hell? I pay too much for this plan, and they cut it off. Nation's best wireless, my butt. Looking up into the clear skies, Drew could see the sun was still high in the sky. But something caught his eye, what looked like a tiny pirate ship that was being held aloft by a cigar-shaped balloon. The ship had a propeller blade on the back of it, and was turning. Holding his phone up, the curious man turned on the camera app and used the zoom function. The video was grainy, but he could see a hedgehog turning a crank. There was also a black rabbit standing beside him, who was lowering a fabric wing out to the side of the ship. A second wing was being deployed on another side of the ship. That looks like... Pudgy? What is he doing in California? Wait. Disappearing people all over the country? And now, a certain adventuring hedgehog was here at the same time? This is no coincidence. I must follow. Pudgy will be able to explain what is going on. Drew hopped into his car as the nuclear-hot seats burned his rear end. The man did not care about curfews or disappearances, as he quickly turned the vehicle's engine on, and the gray vehicle took off at a quick rate of speed to follow the tiny airship as it traveled overhead. The man had to catch up to Pudgy. Meanwhile, on the San Juan, the firebox bunnies Pyro and Fire were making do with their limited supply of wood. Everything had gone fine, till Zippy overslept. The ship had passed over what the humans called Mount San Antonio, but then was caught in the strong winds. They had drifted far off course, and were over the humans' vast city. With all crew awake, the black hare was reprimanded, and the ship had returned to its proper course. The ship's wings and flaps were deployed, while the firewood was being rationed. The captain had been through worse situations than this, and calmly gave orders. The hares were positioned at their posts to balance out the weight of the ship. Pudgy was working the propeller and was ordered to turn at full speed. Alabaster was still asleep, but he would not have been able to help anyway. The hedgehog was amazed at the carpet of homes that spread in all directions below the ship. There were more humans than a hedgehog could ever count that lived here. The homes were packed side by side, with either concrete or desert around them. The roofs were either beige or red, and the buildings were about the same. Very few areas were green, which made Pudgy sad in a way. He missed his forest and his friends and cobalt. The captain called out, "Firebox go for broke. Throw it all in." Pudgy watched as the tiny hares loaded the firebox full of everything they had left. In the distance, a lake could be seen, which seemed out of place in the sea of beige homes with tiled roofs. The hedgehog wiggled his nose and kept cranking as fast as the gears could turn. The captain called out, "Welcome to what the humans call Pudding Stone Reservoir. Our port is in the northeastern section. We have almost made it." The dry desert air was replaced with a slight bit of moisture. Somehow the humans had even managed to develop the areas around the lake, but as they drew closer, they looked like park structures. Pudgy saw a dock with paddle boats lined up, as well as a couple sailboats at another dock. As the ship crossed out onto the open water, long stretches of green grass grew along the shoreline, and a variety of little birds were playing in the water. A huge forest of tall, mature trees started to appear, and the captain turned the ship's wheel to head towards it. "Pudgy, full stop." The hedgehog nodded as he acknowledged the captain's order, and immediately stopped turning the gears, the propeller to cease its revolution, and the airship continued its descent. Pyro and fire. Lower the landing skids. The firebox bunnies saluted and disappeared under the ship again. The same noises as before occurred as the skids were lowered and locked into place. The crew watched as the captain turned the ship's wheel and steered the descending vessel towards a wide section between the trees. The hedgehog peeked over the deck, railing with his eyes wide, as he spotted a town here with little homes. Barns were built as well, and smoke coming from little chimneys of stone. The ship landed hard on the ground and began to slide on the rails. While the grass was soft, the wooden rails were rough, which helped friction cause the ship to slow considerably. The ship lurched to a complete stop, which threw Alabaster forward. The sleeping owl was jolted awake and caught himself before falling off the ship. As the captain called out to the stations, everyone reported that they were all right. Pudgy stood up and looked around as several other animals were peeking out from the town at the airship. "Zippy, lower the gangplank." The captain ordered, and the black hare saluted while complying. As the black hare moved the plank down, the other hare was retracting the wings and storing them amidships. Pudgy scampered up to Alabaster. "Are you okay?" The owl hooted and nodded yes. First Officer Fluffy hopped up to them. "Welcome to Lake Shadow. This is as far as we can take you to," the female hare said with a flourish of her front paw, while the captain nodded as he spoke. "Pudgy and even Alabaster, you two are both welcome to serve on this ship any time. I know you have a place to get to, so consider this a goodbye for now. I suspect that we may meet again one day." Pudgy scampered over and shook the captain's paws, as well as the other hares as well. "Thank you for letting Pudgy and Alabaster ride along. This helped a whole lot." The owl nodded as he stated, "I concur with Pudgy. Thank you, captain and crew of the San Juan." Alabaster motioned for Pudgy to follow and started to head down the gangplank. After Pudgy checked his bag, helmet, and bag were in order, he waved at the hares and then scampered after his owl companion. Once no owl and hedgehog were on the ground, they turned to watch the hares start undoing the netting over the cargo holds. Zippy moved large cloth bags full of something and started to make a pile of their various cargo at the foot of the ramp. Alabaster knew where he was, having visited this town many moons ago with his mother. The owl and hedgehog began to walk and passed by a blacksmith shop. There was a very muscular hare working at a hammer and forge, banging a piece of glowing metal. Pudgy was able to investigate the open buildings as they passed, and soon found a sawmill. Inside, a beaver was chewing on a piece of wood. The aquatic animal was making a statue of an otter. The homes and buildings were following a winding road that weaved through the forest and around the trees. Other animals passed by: bunnies, hares, squirrels, chipmunks, beavers, otters, and a wide variety of birds. The two travelers headed to a large building with a steeply sloped wooden roof. It was an open-air pavilion and had many flat rocks that ring around a center fire pit. Pudgy saw that this was a restaurant of some sort, as many critters were eating or drinking. The owl stopped, sat down on a flat rock, and motioned for Pudgy to join him. As the hedgehog sat opposite facing the owl, he wiggled his nose. "Alabaster, what are we going to do now?" the hedgehog asked as he looked around excitedly. The owl softly laughed. "Well, we are going to wait. My presence has alerted the town, so I suspect we will be visited soon by this region's parliament representative. Pudgy, each type of owl groups together, and they live within a certain region. A group of owls is called a parliament, and every 39 moons, a grand parliament is called. It was at the last grand parliament it was decided to locate the stones." Pudgy wiggled his nose as he asked, "How many moons has it been since then?" The owl rubbed his beak with his chin as he thought. 37 moons, I believe." A higher-pitched voice spoke from behind Pudgy. 38 moons, actually, Alabaster." As Pudgy turned around, he saw a small owl about his size, standing there. This owl was more rounded like a hedgehog, and her feathers were a mix of brown and white. The owl's eyes were yellow, and less gold than Alabaster's. Pudgy waved. "Hello, my name is Pudgy." The little owl hooted and waved. "Hello, Pudgy. I am called Shortfeather. Alabaster, how is it you come to be in accompaniment of a ground walker?" The Arctic owl motioned to his splinted wing. "I was injured. Pudgy helped me with my wing, and is assisting me with returning home to the grand mountain north of here." Shortfeather nodded and responded, "I see. Thank you, Pudgy, for helping Alabaster." The small owl nodded again, hooted happily, and watched as Alabaster rubbed his beak with the tip of his good wing as he spoke. 38 moons, so that is why Grand Claw sent my mother and I to the east. It is time for another grand parliament. Much more than that. I have heard the hawks and eagles are attending. Something monumental is going to happen, and we need to get to the sea of trees in the great forest. Pudgy wiggled his nose as he looked confused. "Where is that?" Alabaster spoke with a reverent tone. "It is south of the grand mountain of my parliament, but north of here. It is a forest full of giant trees with red bark. The tree has grown there since man was just a fanciful dream." Pudgy rubbed his chin with his paw. "The redwood forest. Cobalt showed Pudgy a nature show on television once. The forest is full of trees that stretch all the way to the sky. They even built a tunnel in one, so cars can drive through. It is a protected forest, so the humans cannot cut it down." The small owl gave the hedgehog a strange look as she spoke. "Wait, you lived with the humans?" Pudgy nodded. "Yes, with Pudgy good friend, a human named Cobalt, as well as many other ones. He disappeared in the forest when he came over to visit Pudgy. Alabaster said his Grand Claw might be able to help, so Pudgy helped take Alabaster home." The snow-white owl hooted softly in agreement and watched as the brown owl stood up and waved his one wing at Pudgy. "A pleasure to meet you, Pudgy. I must be off." "Goodbye, both of you." The small owl hooted, bounced out of the pavilion, and quickly took flight. The hedgehog was waving and then turned back to Alabaster. "Pudgy, guess we will need to find another node. Is one around here?" The owl rubbed his beak. "I believe so. It would be to the west of here. How I long to fly. I could just carry you there." The little critter smiled and got up from his seat on the rock to check on the owl's wing. Very gently, Pudgy pushed on certain parts of it, and the owl did not cry out. Well, until he touched the lowermost part, which caused a terrific hoot. "Pudgy, sorry. Pudgy needed to check wing." The owl recovered and nodded. "It is all right, Pudgy. I was wondering if I had recovered as well. It is best for my wing stay splinted for now, but it means our journey will be that much longer. We will need to circle the lake." The hedgehog bounced happily and motioned for the owl to follow. The two companions set out from the pavilion and followed the winding path around the trees. After a long time of walking, the two stopped at the edge of the lake shore. The humans had built picnic pavilions along the edge of the tree line, and there was a rocky shoreline that ran along the water. Pudgy told his owl friend more stories of his adventures, and would stop when the owl would tire of walking. The sun was starting to set when Pudgy turned to look at a concrete walkway. The hedgehog knew that humans would run or walk on it, sometimes with their dogs. The strange thing was, there were no humans anywhere. It was a very warm day, and the sun was shining, so there should be people around. The hedgehog wondered if the disappearances were getting worse. The owl was contemplative and not speaking much, but suddenly gave a warning call. Pudgy snapped back to attention and watched as a tall, dark-skinned human man was walking down the concrete path. He was dressed in a brown delivery truck uniform and looking at his cell phone. Pudgy squinted his eyes, thinking he almost recognized the human. Alabaster ducked behind a green metal trash barrel and pulled Pudgy gently by his quills. As the two critters peeked around the barrel, they could hear the human man talking on the phone. "I know, baby, I will be home soon. I had to check something out first. I am glad they turned the cellular phone towers back on." Drew had followed the tiny airship all the way to the lake, while avoiding police checkpoints along the way. It was well past 5 p.m., so technically he was now breaking the law, but he did not care. There were still people out and about, so he was not too worried. The little airship had to have landed somewhere around the lake, given the course and angle of descent. The man had parked his vehicle at the north lot and had followed the walking path along various parts of the lake, checking out the areas to see if he could find the airship. Drew was out of luck so far, having just searched the children's play area. The exasperated woman on the other end of the cellular phone connection cut out, and the dark-skinned man noticed his phone's signal dropped to 0 bars again. The human shook his head as he put the phone back into his front left pocket. There were several covered tables around Lookout Point, and as the man passed a green trash can, a little voice called out to him. "Hello, are you Mr. Drew?" Pudgy asked while wiggling his nose and waving to get the man's attention. Drew stopped and turned, then looked down to see the little brown hedgehog waving. A big smile formed on his lips, and he waved back. "Oh, my goodness, it is you, Pudgy." "Yes, it is me, Drew, from the Bluebird social media site. Everyone has been arguing whether you were real. I hoped you would come to visit California one day." The hedgehog bounced happily and motioned to the barrel. A snow-white owl walked out and looked up at him with gold eyes. The owl hooted and waved his one wing discreetly. Pudgy motioned with his paw. "This is Alabaster." Pudgy helping him to go home. Mr. Drew, how did you know to find Pudgy here?" The man smiled. "Well, I saw the airship floating down from the sky, so I followed you here. Pudgy, do you know what is going on?" The owl discreetly pulled Pudgy close to him and whispered, "Tell him not of the stones. We do not know how he will react." The hedgehog nodded at the owl, then looked up at the human. "Mr. Drew, can you help us? We need to get to the big redwood forest north of here." The man looked thoughtful. "If I remember correctly, the Redwood Forest Park is near a town called Oric. Pudgy, it is about 11 hours from here by car. Things have become really bad now. It is not safe to travel. People are disappearing left and right. The president and Congress are gone, and the police are enforcing a curfew. It was supposed to start at 5, which it is now 6:30 at the moment." The hedgehog nodded. "Okay, Mr. Drew, Pudgy understands. We will find our own way there." The man watched as Pudgy started to talk to the owl. Drew was conflicted, as he really wanted to help the hedgehog. Having read online of the fantastical adventures, one was right here in his lap, and wished he could go. But he also recognized the fact that he had obligations and commitments. The female friend on the other end of the phone would worry terribly if he did not come home, as he explained. Pudgy scampered up to his foot and hugged his ankle. "Pudgy, glad to have met you, Mr. Drew. We need to get going. It is important Pudgy get owl friend home." The snow owl kept a cautious look, waved with one wing discreetly, and started to scamper away with Pudgy up the concrete path. The man gave a small wave back and looked at his cell phone. There were no signal bars, no data plan working, no way to call her. So that meant there was no way she would find out. "Pudgy, Alabaster, wait up. Screw it. I will take you to Oric." The two critters stopped, watched as the man walked the short distance over to them. Drew knelt and gently picked up the critters in each hand. Alabaster froze, while the hedgehog looked hopeful as Drew stood and walked with a spring in his step. It was his turn to have a Pudgy adventure, and perhaps along the way he would find out what was happening. It was not long by human speed for Drew to reach his gray car. Alabaster was sat down on the roof as the human opened the passenger door. Pudgy was placed onto the passenger seat. Then Drew stood to retrieve the owl and then place him beside Pudgy. The man shut the door, walked around the vehicle, opened his driver's side door, slid into the driver's seat, and then shut the door with a smile on his face and laughed. "It's 700 miles to Auric. I have full tank of gas, a hedgehog, a snow owl, and half a box of icing-filled snack cakes." Pudgy motioned with his paw. "Hit it." Drew laughed at the movie reference as he turned the car's engine on, pulled out of the parking spot, and out onto the road. It was not long until the vehicle was up to speed on the empty roads. As the human drove Pudgy and Alabaster to Auric, the world around the speeding gray car continued to fall apart. While automation had replaced many jobs over the years, key jobs still were done by humans, and as they disappeared, essential elements of normal order were failing. The cellular phone towers were losing power because the power plants could not operate at full capacity. Despite calls to modernize and repair over the decades, the country still relied on coal-fired and natural gas-burning power plants. Each type of system required people to show up on time and work long hours to prep, fuel, and monitor the electrical output. At first, the missing people were offset by overtime. But now that vast swaths of people were missing, the plants were operating on emergency staff. When Drew's cellular phone worked, he would get emergency bulletins from the news agencies. Reports were coming in from all over the country of rolling blackouts. Pennsylvania, for instance, generated more power than the state used, so it would send excess power to the surrounding states. When Homer City, Conemaugh, and Shellocta workers vanished, the plants kept running due to automated coal conveyor belts feeding the furnaces. However, the humans who moved the coal trains and trucks into position dumped the coal onto the conveyor belts, crushed the coal, sent it to the furnace, monitored and filled the boilers. Were not around to continue those tasks. Soon the fires went cold, and the huge towers stopped steaming. The electrical grids all started to fail, and a ring of darkness was forming around the western side of the state. The natural gas-burning plants were facing a similar situation, as they required power to run the pumping stations that sucked the gas out of the ground. The nuclear plants were few and far between, and were operating at their normal capacity. The same was that of the garbage and oil-burning plants, though their output too was diminishing as the men who drove the trucks that dumped garbage into the furnace were not there. With no power, that also meant the water and sewage treatment plants went offline. Yes, they had emergency generators, but those required diesel fuel, which ran out over time. Businesses closed to lack of utilities, and with no power, the payment processing systems too failed. People who still used cash were fine for a time, until the cash ran out. Banks were closed, so no funds could be accessed, with time running out, and the military in charge due to the former president's order. The decision was made to cut power to the civilian homes. Now that a national emergency martial law declaration in place, the states could not argue as all levels of civilian control were overridden. There was a tremendous outcry starting, as the variable power caused frantic broadcasts to a frightened public. Some chose factual-based reporting, while others sensationalized, but that did little to quell the growing fear in the remaining humans. The Department of Defense tried to quell the fury by advising the power would remain on at the hospitals, grocery stores, banks, and pharmacies. As one might expect, a panic formed, and throngs of desperate people were out scrambling for resources. The former worries of the nation were a distant memory, with all attention situated on the here and now. Drew yawned as he drove his gray vehicle. Since he had already worked a 10-hour shift, the man had not planned on an extended trip after work to visit the Redwood Forest National Park. Thankfully, the drive had been uneventful so far, with little to no presence by an authority of any kind. The human had been worried about the curfew and possible checkpoints on the roads, but they were now 4 hours into an 11-hour drive north, and the roads were completely clear. To save time, Drew had taken Highway 5 and was driving the speed limit. The last thing he wanted was to attract attention by speeding, because while not visible, the man knew they were out there watching somewhere. The highway was empty, which was unheard of in California, a state known for its legendary traffic jams. There would be the occasional 18-wheeler, who despite being an empty road, still needed to pass him as he was driving. Pudgy hugged Drew multiple times, and was telling his grand tale from the very start of his adventures. In 4 hours, the hedgehog was up to the part where he met the Kaiser for the very first time. The man would nod, smile, and occasionally pet the hedgehog gently. The little critter would bounce happily and keep telling his story. His most recent grand adventure was going on the attack against the monster, and finished with the climactic battle in Poland against the Kaiser and his demonic forces. As the story ended, Pudgy promptly fell asleep. The owl had already nodded off, around the part of the Civil War ghosts, with a very quiet car. Drew had a long while to ponder. It was amazing that this little hedgehog had so much activity in such a short period of time. The man could not help but be a little jealous, since he would like to go on the occasional adventure, but like his human friend Cobalt, he had to work. Checking the dashboard, Drew noticed that the car was less than an eighth of a tank worth of fuel. This led to a small concern in his mind, that if the power was out, would the gasoline stations still be operational? For that matter, if they were, would there be people around to work the stations? And would the store be open because he really needed some coffee? Checking on the critters, they were still fast asleep in the passenger seat. Like the man, the two travelers had had a very busy day. The radio hissed as it turned on again. This is W106.5, Fremont's home for the greatest hits. No music today, we have the emergency generators on, and I am unsure how much power we have. Update. The attempts to enforce the curfew were abandoned across most of the state. What few police remained were unable to enforce anything. The solar, wind, and tidal power farms are operational, but their power is being diverted to essential operations. The state is, for the most part, is dark, and we are receiving multiple reports of shots being fired. The tired man yawned again, listening to the broadcast on a random radio station, and saw a sign that Red Love's travel stop. Nodding to himself, put the turn signal on, and then steered the vehicle to exit the highway. Driving down the off-ramp, Drew merged onto an empty side road, and then pulled into the truck stop. Hundreds of the large trucks had pulled in and parked around every available spot. With his car running on fumes, the man sighted an empty pump and pulled up to it. Shutting the engine off, Drew rubbed his eyes. Since the car had stopped, the owl woke up and was looking at him with gold eyes. The human smiled and went to pet the owl, but it pulled back from him, with one wing starting to puff out. Pulling his hand back, nodded. The man instead opened his door and exited the vehicle. The truck stop had power, with the fluorescent lights hissing overhead. Drew walked up to the pump and saw a red light on with a message. Pressed to call the attendant. The tired man pushed the button, and soon a tried, angry female voice called out over the overhead speaker. The interior buildings are closed to the public. Do you want gas? Pay at the pump only. Drew called out. Yes, please, 87. The pump clicked, and the terminals all began to light up. The LCD price loaded, and his mouth dropped. $20 a gallon? The woman laughed like a witch over the speakers. And you will pay it too, I bet? Shaking his head as he reached into his back pocket, Drew pulled out his credit card. He followed the on-screen prompts, and then paid for the transaction. The pump clicked once again, and the nozzle unlocked from the pump. Pulling out the nozzle, opened the fuel door for his vehicle, inserted the nozzle, squeezed the handle, and started to fuel his car, mumbling to himself. 24-gallon tank at $12 per gallon. $480 to fill up. I will be having a chat with Cobalt when this is all over. The man said, while nodding and watching the numbers spin. Thankfully, the vehicle did not to fill completely, and the final total was only $400.54. Drew returned the gas filler back to the pump and pressed the call attendant button. The pump did not react, and the lights all started to turn off. The human really needed to use the restroom, but since the building was closed and a decorative flower planter was there, those flowers looked like they needed to be watered. Meanwhile, Alabaster watched the human walk behind the car, and he stayed at the rear end of the vehicle for a time. The human returned after a short time, sat down into the driver's seat, and shut the door. Turning the engine back on, Drew pulled the car out from the gasoline pumps and drove past the convenience store/trucker service center. Inside the brightly lit building, there was not a single person. Drew had been very lucky, it would seem, nodded to himself, while pulling back onto the on-ramp for the highway. The gray vehicle merged onto an empty lane, and soon it was once more up to highway speed. The radio hissed again. Okay, we are back again. The generator ran out of diesel, so we siphoned some off from the termite guy's truck from next door. All sporting events are canceled immediately. All concerts are canceled. All movie theaters canceled. And since the motherfudging FCC is not around no more, I get to do what I always wanted to do. Drew listened and smiled when the DJ started to swear, then turned on the familiar sounds of a certain heavy metal band whose name starts with M started to play. It was not one of the safe radio songs they normally played. It was So Fudging What, which is one of the raunchier and vulgar songs of their repertoire. As one particularly vulgar chorus started to play, a certain hedgehog just happened to wake up. Drew was not paying attention and was listening to the music with a smirk on his face until a little voice started saying those naughty words and bouncing beside Alabaster. Drew looked down at the seat. Oh, no, Pudgy, do not say those words. They are bad. So instead of saying the words, the hedgehog started to make beeping noises. The Pudgy version was very silly, and Drew started laughing. It also turned out that someone from the FCC was listening because he heard the DJ swear, and then suddenly the radio went dead as the transmission was cut. The car was quiet once more, save for the sound of wind passing by the vehicle. The air conditioner in the car was spotty at best, and was on the list of things to repair. Drew did not mind usually, because with the windows down, a terrific breeze blew through the vehicle. Road signs offering directions began to appear, with flickering lights illuminating some but not all. Steering to the slight left, the man merged onto Highway 580, which had no traffic at all as well. Drew pressed the seek button on the radio, and found another station that was operating. It was mid-discussion, with two very animated older men. You know what this is? It's those hippie liberal commie yahoos from out east. They could not figure out a way to advance their green agenda, so they engineered a great disappearance of all people. Drew blinked and looked to see that he had switched over to AM 1240. AM stations were notorious for religious/insane political channels, as well as off-the-wall offerings. The other elderly gentleman shouted, "Bernie, you are so full of it. We all know that our one true Lord and Savior has called back all of the faithful. It is Judgment Day. Repent, listeners, for the day of the coming of our Lord is upon us. Repent." "Oh, stuff it, Jack. We know that is a bunch of shiitake mushrooms. If only we had voted for." The two men were shouting, so they almost sounded the same. An exasperated female voice cut into the broadcast and started to speak. The woman sounded tired, which only made sense given everything that had been going on. We will let Bernie and Jack collect their thoughts during a brief break for the news. This is Brenda Smith of AM 1240, your source of news and opinion. The Defense Department has issued a press release for immediate dissemination. At current estimates, almost 75% of people have disappeared. The reports have varied and are based on state-reported data. The armed forces remain staffed and ready to step in to assist in day-to-day operations. Power substations are being disabled to ensure that the limited power supplies are used properly. Please do not interfere with utility workers, nor their escorts by the various branches. Please remain home and keep the roads free of traffic so our forces can mobilize to the areas that they are needed quickly. And now, back to the show. It is those left-leaning liberals. No, it is the rapture. Drew shook his head, looked at Pudgy, who was now awake, and looking out the passenger side car window. Whatever it is, they are both wrong. Pudgy, do you know what is going on? Alabaster looked at the hedgehog, who turned to face Drew and started to talk. Mr. Drew, shortly after Alabaster came to visit, Cobalt came over to Pudgy's house. After he brought supplies and fixed things, he was walking back to Pudgy House. Cobalt did not feel good, and then vanished in front of all Pudgy's friends. Alabaster told Pudgy that his owl family may be able to help, so we have been traveling to where the family is. Drew kept his eyes on the road while speaking. And that is in Oric? Okay, I see. After I get us there, then what? Pudgy rubbed his chin with his paw, watched the human nod as he spoke, and then turned to his owl companion. The snow-white owl looked back with a concerned look. Do not tell him any more. We do not know how we will react. Pudgy wiggled his nose as he whispered. Pudgy knows, but Mr. Drew is nice. We should tell him. The owl shook his head, thankful his security risk friend whispered for a change. The snow owl looked out the window, while Pudgy turned back to the man. Somewhere in the forest is snow owl family. We will ask them what to do, and then Pudgy will know how to help. Drew appeared to be satisfied as he commented, Okay, sounds good to me. That is the best plan we have. The human could tell the owl did not trust him, and suspected he may have told the hedgehog to hold something back. But there was still a long road ahead, and many opportunities to get more information along the way. The lights of the dashboard illuminated the front of Drew, but the rest of the car was dark. The windows were not fully open, but open far enough to thoroughly cool the vehicle. Even at night, it was still very warm, and the driver was sweating a bit. Pudgy and Alabaster settled back into the gray fabric seat and watched the stars in the night sky speed by the windows. The highway was now running through vast swaths of farmland. The highway lights were few and far between, so they were in near total darkness. As they started to approach the Livermore city limits, the roadway remained dark. The gray car's headlights were the only source of man-made light. Drew pondered if this meant that the power was out due to military or by lack of humans. The road started to pitch upwards as they were nearing a mountain range. Pudgy started to yawn again and drifted off to sleep. The hours continued to pass, with Drew was starting to feel the effects of being up way longer than usual. A thought occurred to pull over to take a nap, but as soon as that thought crossed his mind, the realization occurred that he might not wake up again. It was not the first time he was up this long. There was the double and a half shift he worked for Christmas. After cresting the mountain, the road started to wind down the mountain. He took his foot off the accelerator and was able to coast down with the brakes. This allowed the car to save some fuel, which they needed every drop to make it to their destination. A slight fog started to form as they descended. What should have been a sea of light in the distance was a vast void of darkness as far as the eye could see. As the car continued to drive down the highway, road signs would briefly illuminate from the headlights. Drew read out loud, Castro Valley, Ashland, San Leandro, Oakland Zoo. I wonder what is going on at the zoo. Drew pondered that the animals were probably okay, but the humans that ran the zoo would be the issue. Who would feed the animals? And more importantly, were they still doing that surgery on the giraffe, as the local news had reported the other day? That would be absolutely terrible to have the surgeon disappear during the procedure. Never in all of my life did I think I would have to worry about something like this. Drew muttered and tried to search the radio again. It was all static, with no channels operating. However, once the vehicle started to enter the Oakland area, a ribbon of light could be seen. The military had kept the power on to the hospital and several other key buildings along the road. The man could see flashing lights from the police checkpoints still set up at the intersections. Although, Drew wondered if there were any people left to work in the area. The highway widened to 10 lanes. After driving all by himself for at least an hour, he came upon a couple big rigs driving along in a convoy. As Drew navigated around them, he noticed it was the white truck competitor shipping company. Boo! The man called out the window with a laugh and a wide grin on his lips. The highway ran along the San Francisco Bay and over a series of causeways that ran along the shoreline. Drew looked left, because even at night, you can still see the Golden Gate Bridge on this stretch. However, to his shock and horror, the bridge was dark. They had even turned off the red blinking warning lights at the very top. The safety lights were there, so the airplanes and helicopters would not hit it when flying at night. Gripping the steering wheel a bit tighter, a knot started to form in his stomach as he continued to drive. After an unknown period passed, a big sign that was suspended over the roadway by huge aluminum pipes appeared. The sign read, Point Richmond Toll Plaza 1 mile. Drew wondered if the toll plaza was still running. He did not have to wait long, because at the rate of speed he was going, the vehicle would make it there in a couple of minutes. As his rear end was starting to go numb again, the tired man tried to shift position. Looking to his right, he noticed the owl was awake and looking at him again. I know, Alabaster, I'm too close, but I need to change position. The owl did not respond, but kept a watchful eye on him as he shifted around to get more comfortable. As the car turned a slight bend, the dark toll plaza lay before them. Normally, there would be 10 open lanes, staffed by toll plaza workers, and a brightly illuminated plaza. None of that was the case, and 9 of the barricades were down, except for the one closest to the toll services building. Drew slowed the vehicle and maneuvered his car through the one open booth. There were no workers, but the LCD screen was still illuminated somehow. The display read, Toll by plate active. Just drive through. We will mail you a bill. Nodding to himself, the plate scanning camera flashed behind the vehicle as it passed through the toll booth. It was more expensive to use the toll by plate, but given everything going on, the bill was going to be a bit delayed. Was the postal service even still operating at this point? The man pondered. The vehicle cleared the plaza and was back on the open highway. Gradually, he pressed the accelerator and brought the vehicle back up to highway speed. The stretch of road after the plaza was over the open water. Unlike the Golden Gate Bridge, the bridge that carried this highway was moored into the bay floor by massive concrete and steel pilings. It was built this way because the span was too great to be able to be supported by suspension cables. There were also earthquake concerns, which the man really hoped that there would be none of which to speak of. That was the last thing people needed, was an earthquake. The bridge was dark, and the surrounding hills dark as well. It was beyond eerie at this point, until suddenly the radio fired up with a station playing instrumental hip-hop and slow jazz. Someone was still broadcasting on an AM transmitter, which was both a surprise and a welcome relief. Tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, as someone was playing a trumpet solo for way too long, he heard the sound dip down and the DJ start to speak. I am just going to let the smooth, mellow sounds play in the background. This is DJ Jamal of AM 740, San Quentin's home for funk. Our music is so good, it should be criminal. This is a news break. Disco is not dead, and will be on in 4 hours. News reports are spotty at best, cats and kittens, but here is what I have. As of a couple hours ago, we have lost all connection to the rest of the country. All the national news operations are offline, including the Associated Press. A ragtag coalition of local news reports have been communicating with each other to form a chain of reports. The disappearances have continued to accelerate, with whole cities going empty. Fires have broken out, as overloaded electrical grids, due to lack of power, caused brownouts and transformers to explode. The electrical substations in San Rafael have been turned off, as well as Baltimore Park. Drew nodded while he listened to jazz fusion playing in the background. In time, the transmission started to crackle and fade, not due to power issues, but because he was driving too far past the transmitter. The car was dark and quiet once again, and the huge highway lanes started to narrow down. Soon the signs indicated that the highway had changed to 101, and his pocket started to vibrate. Carefully retrieving his phone, he saw that he had 2 bars of signal, and a flood of messages were coming in. There were several worried, then angry, then really fudged off angry text messages coming in from the lady friend that he had been speaking to earlier when he ran into Pudgy. The man did not blame her, and if he got back from this Pudgy adventure, would apologize. In a worst-case scenario, he could show her the hedgehog and blame him for being late. That made him chuckle, as the thought of her trying to be mad while Pudgy bouncing in her hands. As the hours passed, the vehicle sped along a 2-lane highway, along and over the mountains. It wound to and fro, up and down and side to side. During the day, this stretch was very scenic. At night, however, it was all darkness, save for 2 beams of light that were cast forth in front of the vehicle. Pudgy woke up in the passenger seat, started bouncing, and was wiggling his nose. "Mr. Drew, Pudgy smells the ocean." The exhausted man nodded, but did not look at the hedgehog as he spoke, and yawned terribly. Turning his head to the left, Drew could see the ripple of ocean water in the distance as the moonlight lit up the coastline. The vastness of the Pacific Ocean was shrouded by the darkness of night, but to the relief of the exhausted man, he could see signs for the town of Oric approaching and then passing by his headlights. Oric was a small town that was the start of a vast national and state park. Famed for the redwood trees that you could drive through, it was also the best place to see wildlife. Hundreds of picnic and camping sites stretched all the way north to the border with Oregon. Drew was falling asleep while driving, and the car would start to veer to the side before he would wake up and steer back. After the 5th time that happened, the man saw that the car's gas tank was almost empty per the gauge on the car's dashboard. The engine was starting to sputter, so it was crystal clear he needed to pull over. The engine turned off as it burned through the last gasps of fuel vapor. However, there was enough momentum to reach a darkened liquor store that was in a plaza beside the road. The vehicle coasted into a parking lot in front of the closed store. Drew pressed the brake pedal and slowed the car to a stop. They were parked in a spot in front of the store, and the man put the vehicle into park. Turning the key in the ignition to the accessory position, he turned on the car's overhead map light to illuminate the interior. The exhausted man turned to look at the hedgehog and owl. "We made it to Oric." Drew's eyes involuntarily closed and slumped over in the driver's seat. With destination reached, vehicle safely parked, the man could sleep easily now. The human started to snore like a buzz saw, which spooked the owl. Alabaster had never heard a human make a noise like that before, and wondered where the rumbles were coming from. Pudgy bounced happily, excited that they were here, but also concerned for his friend. Alabaster was motioning to him with his good wing. "Pudgy, I think we should let him rest. We were able to sleep while he made this strange box move for us." The hedgehog nodded and looked around the vehicle, as well as through the glass. The snow-white owl flapped his one good wing and was able to gain enough lift to get up onto the dashboard. He wanted a better vantage point to see from. The owl could not see much, because the light from the map light was messing with his normally keen eyes. Owls could see very well at night, provided there was no man-made sources of light that would interfere. "Pudgy, I do not see any light outside, so it would appear the humans went away here too." As the owl turned back to his hedgehog companion, he saw Pudgy was climbing the door handle. The hedgehog shimmied across the armrest and found the door pull. The owl watched and realized that the critter was trying to pop the door open far enough to get out. After a couple of attempts, Alabaster watched the handle pull out and then heard the door click. It started to drift open slowly and with a terrific screech. Alabaster turned back to Drew, who was still snoring as he slept. The hedgehog jumped off the plastic armrest and back onto the fabric seat. Alabaster motioned towards the man in the driver's seat, and as the hedgehog turned to his human friend, both animals watched as his dark skin started to go translucent. The human slowly faded away, along with the sound of his snoring. Pudgy quickly scampered over to hug his hand while it was still visible. Hopefully, he could hug him one last time before he went away. "Thank you, Mr. Drew," Pudgy said as he watched as his paws passed through the spot where Drew used to be, and soon the seat was empty. The vehicle was dead quiet. The hedgehog started crying and began to wail loudly while sniffing his nose. The owl hopped off the dash and onto the passenger seat before hopping out through the partially open vehicle door. The owl knew he was out of place, and his companion needed time. After a time to grieve concluded, there was no longer a reason to stay in the car, so after checking that he had all his things, Pudgy turned and followed the owl down through the doorway. The hedgehog landed hard on the cool concrete parking lot with a thud and continued to whimper. All of Pudgy's human friends are gone now. The critter continued to wail and was crying terribly still. Alabaster remained quiet and continued walking slowly past the vehicle's front tire. As the owl listened to the sobs of his hedgehog companion, his feelings were becoming muddled. All his life, he had heard the stories and watched with his own eyes the atrocities that the humans wrought on the animals. But all the way on this journey, Alabaster had encountered nice humans. They were friendly and willing to help Pudgy and his owl friend. The snow owl knew what his mother would say, and she would chide him that one good deed does not outweigh a lifetime of bad ones. But still, there was now a doubt where none was there before. The two animals cleared the front of the car and watched as the headlights were starting to dim as the battery was being drained. Pudgy looked up, sniffed the air with his ears perked up, as he started to see a darkness that blotted out the stars above them in the sky. The sound of an owl hooting could be heard, and Pudgy looked at Alabaster as he called out, "Do you hear that, Alabaster?" The snow-white owl nodded and sounded a greeting call in return. At first, there was no response, but soon there was a return call, which made the snow owl happy. "Looks like they heard me, so I suspect we will be joined soon, Pudgy. I am curious who it is." The hedgehog scampered up beside the owl and nodded while sniffing his nose. As the two companions continued to walk away from the vehicle, another snow-white owl flew down from the night skies above and landed in front of them. As this new owl turned around, Pudgy could see that its dark brown markings mixed in with the white feathers. The new owl waved its wings and hooted happily. The hedgehog watched as Alabaster bounced over and touched beaks with the owl. Alabaster did not say anything for a long time, until he motioned with his good wing towards Pudgy. "Pudgy, this is my mother. Mother, this is Pudgy Hedgehog. He helped me get here." The female owl walked over and immediately pulled the hedgehog in close to her body. She wrapped both Alabaster and the hedgehog in her wings and hugged the two gently. After a long quiet time passed, the mother owl let the two go. As she folded her wings back, she spoke, "Thank you, Pudgy, for bringing my son to me. Oh, where are my manners? My name is Ice Feather. I am pleased to make your acquaintance." Pudgy bounced happily, but noticed the mother owl was inspecting him closely with her gold eyes. The hedgehog companion of her son was dressed with a little backpack and a metal helmet with a round circle attached to the front of it. After inspecting Pudgy, she turned her gaze onto her son. "Alabaster, what is that on your wing?" Ice Feather said with concern in her voice, until Pudgy waved at her and explained Pudgy had to splint his wing. When Pudgy found Alabaster, his wing was bent backwards. Alabaster nodded as he spoke. "I ran into the tree when we exited the ley line node. Pudgy lives nearby to where the tree ring is, along with his woodland friends." The mother owl was pecking at the splint with her beak. "I see, and this was to help you heal." The two traveling companions nodded and watched as Ice Feather motioned with one of her wings at the splint. "Pudgy, take it off, please." The hedgehog scampered over to his companion. Pudgy unsure. Last time Pudgy checked, Alabaster had a boo-boo wing. The mother owl gave him a look, which any critter would recognize as do it or else, and started to carefully remove the splint. In time, Alabaster was freed from his restraints. Ice Feather nodded, and then pulled out her son's injured wing with her beak. As Alabaster's wing extended, he winced slightly. "Looks like you are mostly healed, my son. You can fly, but you will not be fast." Alabaster nodded as he responded, "Yes, mother. Did we make it in time for the Grand Parliament?" Ice Feather spoke. "Yes, we will speak more as we fly. As our hedgehog friend is a ground walker, I will carry Pudgy. I am certain Grand Claw will want to meet with the hedgehog who helped bring you to us. Pudgy, normally I would say my talons might hurt, but you have that strange thing on your back, which I can grab onto without concern. Our tree is not far from here, and I am sure that you do not wish to walk the whole way there." The mother owl said as she walked around the hedgehog and pecked at the backpack on the hedgehog's back. Pudgy nodded in agreement and tied the straps of his pack around his body. The critter also tightened the strap over his shoulders securely, and once ready spoke clearly to the mother owl. "Pudgy ready. Please don't drop, Pudgy." The two owls hooted as they laughed, and the hedgehog watched as Alabaster started to flap his wings. The young male owl was grimacing from the pain, but after a few attempts, he was able to ascend into the night sky. Pudgy watched the mother owl take off, and then circle around to snatch the hedgehog in her claws. The little critter watched the ground quickly went away as he was carried high into the sky. The gray car's headlights went dark as the battery ran out, whispering to himself, "Thank you again, Mr. Drew, for everything." Pudgy was being carried higher into the night sky. At first, he covered his eyes with his paws, but once Ice Feather leveled off and was gliding with her wings outstretched, he uncovered them. Alabaster was flying beside her as well, but he was having to flap a bit more, as his wing was still injured. The moonlight was bright tonight, and was illuminating the owls with a soft blue hue. The trees moved below them as the breeze caused their branches full of evergreen needles to rustle. While the hedgehog knew that at this height, he was done for if he fell, the first thought was the backpack straps digging into his body. The mother owl's claws had gripped tightly onto his backpack, and if the material held, Pudgy would be fine. It was as they entered deeper into the forest that the trees became gigantic. They were taller than anything the little critter had ever seen. The trunks were wider than Cobalt's big red vehicle. The owls expertly flew between the large trees and swooped under and above the branches that intertwined themselves throughout the forest canopy. It also grew almost completely dark, which meant Pudgy could barely see Ice Feather. As she banked hard to the left, the hedgehog was thrown upwards and then swung hard back down as she leveled off once more, sounding a greeting call. The two owls hooted very loudly. Before Pudgy was ready, he started to hear return calls from many owls. To say many would be an understatement, and if he had been able to see in the dark, the hedgehog would have seen the trees were full of owls. Hundreds of owls had assembled, having flown in from all lands. A familiar shrill voice came from below Pudgy. "Hi, Pudgy. I see you and Alabaster made it." As the critter looked down, it was Short Feather. The burrowing owl wiggled her wings and then dove down towards the forest floor, holding for dear life into his backpack straps. He could feel Ice Feather tilting back. She called down to Pudgy, "We are here, so get ready for landing. I am going to drop you onto a safe spot." The little hedgehog looked up. "Drop Pudgy? Where?" The critter called out, and soon felt his body falling. The mother owl had released her claws, but to his amazement he did not drop far and landed onto a soft and squishy area. In the dim light, the hedgehog saw both Alabaster and Ice Feather land nearby. The mother owl was checking her son's wing, and the flight seemed to work out the remaining injury. Reaching up to his mining helmet, Pudgy flipped the switch, and his headlamp turned on. A tiny beam of soft white light was cast in front of him, and he could see he had landed on a big patch of dense moss. Remaining on all four paws, trying to be as stable as possible, Pudgy turned his head and body around to illuminate the area around him. Their little critter also did not want to shine the light directly into the owl's eyes. The two Arctic owls looked at the hedgehog curiously. Pudgy was able to survey the area quickly and realized he was on the very top of a tree. The branches had spread out horizontally in many directions, but he was on the center part, and based on his estimation, it was big enough for Mr. Bear to sleep and roll around to each side without worrying about falling off. As the critter crawled to where the owls were, Pudgy reached up to his headlamp to cut his light. Ice Feather hooted softly as she laughed. "Well, we got here safe, you two. Before we meet up with Grand Claw, I want Pudgy to meet someone first." As the hedgehog stood up and looked around, his eyes were adjusting to the moonlight. Pudgy still could not see well, but he was starting to see shapes and dark shadows moving in the trees. Alabaster walked slowly over to Pudgy and looked at him. "Thank you, Pudgy, for helping me return to my family." The hedgehog bounced slightly. Pudgy glad to help. "Pudgy, hope your Grand Claw will know what to do." Ice Feather turned to the critter. "What do you mean, Pudgy?" Before the hedgehog could answer, another Arctic owl landed on the treetop area where they were standing. This owl looked like someone had painted him with black paint in sections, and he even had extra feathers tied around his head, almost like a head dress that a Native American human might wear. The owl strode up to the group and hooted in greeting. The two owls returned the call, and Pudgy waved. Somewhere in the distance, Pudgy could hear the owls gently hitting the tree limbs. In a strange way, it almost sounded like drumming. Several owls were also sending a call of some sort, which started to sound musical. The new owl puffed his wings out and then started to bounce as he danced around the platform of sorts where they stood. As the strange owl danced closer, Pudgy started to see he was carrying a burning piece of plant material that had a musty smell to it. Whatever was being done did not feel bad. If anything, he started to feel more at ease with his surroundings. After making a couple circles around the area, the owl bowed slightly towards Pudgy before he stood upright. The strange owl was about a head taller than Pudgy, so maybe he was about 8 inches tall. The hedgehog returned the slight bow. "My name is Pudgy Hedgehog. What is yours?" The owl's beak opened, and he started to speak. "Welcome, Groundwalker. I am called Painted Feather. I am the shaman for this parliament. I do not sense any evil within you, but I do sense you have spent much time with the humans." The hedgehog nodded. Yes, Pudgy used to live with good human friend Cobalt. Then Pudgy moved to own home in the woods. Cobalt was so nice and helped Pudgy, but the little hedgehog started to whimper, and then he started to cry. As he sobbed, after Alabaster arrived, Cobalt said he felt funny. Then he slowly vanished and went away. The shaman nodded. "I see. You cared for this human." Pudgy was wailing and blurted out about all the other human friends who disappeared. The owl listened and nodded before turning to look at Ice Feather. The mother owl walked over and then pulled the little hedgehog against her body and wrapped her wings around him. After a bit of time passed, the hedgehog was above to recover. When he was more presentable, she released him and watched as Painted Feather was inspecting him. The shaman had one gold eye and one black one, and was wafting the smoke around the platform with his wing. The platform was quiet, save for the occasional owl call in the distance. Alabaster looked at Painted Feather. "Shaman, I gave Pudgy a brief explanation about the Gaia stones. Perhaps you can go into further detail." The female owl nodded. I think that would be for the best. Pudgy, my son may have omitted some key details. Grand Claw is wise, but if you are talking about bringing back the humans... As Pudgy raised his paw as he was about to begin to speak, the shaman owl nodded. Pudgy, it is time I tell you the tale of the world and how it came to be. The world is a vast island that floats in an endless sea of water. At each corner of the island are strands that the world hangs from. Above is endless rock, and that is where our animal brethren came from. The hedgehog quietly listened and sat down in front of the shaman, listening intently. When the world is old, the cords will break, and the land sinks back into the ocean. A great cleaning occurs, and then new land is created once more. This has happened several times with our world, and now is the time for a cleansing. The hedgehog started to wiggle his nose as he started to sniff while his eyes were tearing up. Oh no, the world is going to sink again. That means everyone is going to go away. We must stop this. Painted Feather placed a wingtip softly on the hedgehog's head. As the little critter calmed, the shaman continued with his story. In the times long ago, all our animal brethren lived in the rock above the world. The rock was an arch and was crowded. The animals wondered what lies below the water, and the great beaver's kin was sent to investigate. The water beetle landed in the water and swam below the water as the animals watched. After a time had passed, the beetle began to bring up a new world. The land spread out in all directions, and new bonds were formed with the stone arch. The wet ground dried under the warm sun that shone above. Before the ground walkers came, the birds were sent to explore the land. Brother Buzzard, Mother Owl, Brother Eagle, Mother Hawk flew to all corners of the island. But the ground was still wet, and their wings made the land change. That is how mountains and valleys were formed. Though the ground walkers pleaded for them to not make the whole world that way, as they glided on the winds, the plains were formed. Pudgy nodded, completely fascinated by the story. Painted Feather took a breath, and then started to bounce around the platform again, dancing with the smoking plant material. It was not a dance. He was acting out how the birds flew all around the world. Then he returned to Pudgy and gently touched his nose. Then it was time for the animals to descend, and they climbed the bonds to the world. The creatures spread out along the new lands, with plants growing beside them as they explored the lands. As the animals explored, Gaia told them to stay awake for 7 days and nights. But along the way, most could not resist the temptation to sleep. Only the owl, panther, and a few others could remain awake the entire time. Gaia blessed those to be able to see in the dark when the sun hid beneath the ocean waters. The shaman went on to explain about the plants, how they spread all around the world, why certain plants were green throughout the year, while others would lose their leaves, why there were seasons, as well as many other topics. Pudgy was realizing just how little he knew about the natural world, so he paid close attention. The hedgehog raised his paw. Painted Feather, why are the humans disappearing? The shaman hooted softly as he raised a wing. Patience, little one. Gaia is the name we animals use to describe Mother Earth. She blessed this world with abundance, and life sprang eternal throughout. The binds that attach this world to the archway of rock used to be much bigger. The stones were the size of mountains, though over time the rain, the wind, the snow, the ice broke the mountains down. The rocks spread throughout the world, and those are what we call the Gaia stones. It is the very connection to Gaia. Ice Feather nodded, and Alabaster listened intently as well. It had been many moons since he heard this story, and it was always a treat to listen to the shaman. Painted Feather started to dance around the platform once again, motioning with his wings to show the weather breaking down the mountains. He returned once more. It was after the stones had spread throughout the land that Gaia realized she was lonely, so she created the humans and gifted them many abilities that the animals did not have. They spread out throughout the land, but along the way, darkness crept into their hearts. I suspect you have seen a touch of that darkness. The hedgehog nodded and sniffed his nose again sadly. The humans began to destroy. They took beyond what they needed, and the very land began to die once more. The bonds to the rock arch began to weaken, and the lands of the world began to sink into the ocean once more. The animals hoped that they would see the error of their ways and tried to help. The humans did not listen, and chose to lash out in anger. They cut down the forests, they poisoned the land, made fertile ground into desert, and committed vast atrocities throughout the world. It was then when Gaia made a desperate plea and called out to Grand Claw. He was the age of Alabaster, when he flew from our great tree that lies to the direction of the sun past the great mountain to the north of here. Pudgy bounced. Pudgy knows that place. It is called Mount Rainier. Pudgy was there, and flew my plane to save a human friend from the evil Kaiser. The shaman looked at him. You were in the strange winged thing that flew past our tree. The hedgehog nodded, which drew a look of confusion mixed with curiosity from the shaman. It would seem you have a tale to tell me as well. The critter nodded again, while the shaman started to dance around again, acting out the story. Grand Claw found the Gaia stone, long hidden away in a pocket of forest hidden from man. Gaia called out weakly and pleaded for the other stones to be found. She did not want to let the land sink below the water once more, but it was clear that man was the cause of death and suffering within the world. So Grand Claw pledged to find the stones and return to the great tree. The hedgehog could hear a thunderous rush of wings flapping above him. The air moved quickly around him as an extremely large Arctic owl landed on the platform. This owl towered above the rest and was pure white. The owl was far older than any other of the parliament, and his claws almost resembled hawk talons. Two gold eyes stared intently at Pudgy, and then Painted Feather. An elderly male voice started to come from the silver beak of the owl. "Greetings. This is the part where I arrive in the story," the Grand Claw said with a laugh. The shaman danced around the platform once more. Grand Claw sent our parliament to speak to the others, and a great parliament was called forth. All the owls from all around the world came to be together. There were disagreements, but at the end, all were unified in the desire to find the stones. One by one, the stones were found, and the connection to Gaia was restored. Our brethren in the skies also joined our cause. Soon the eagles, the hawks, the buzzards, the flocks of all birds were sent to all corners of our world. Grand Claw puffed up proudly, and now all stones have been located. Gaia's will has deemed the humans to be removed from this world once more. Their kind will never return. The words of the Grand Claw hit Pudgy hard, and the little hedgehog started to wail once again. Tears were streaming down his face, and his nose was running terribly. The elderly owl looked at the hedgehog strangely, as he was not expecting that reaction. Pudgy's cries filled the air throughout the treetops, and he was being studied by owls of all parliaments. After a long time passed, of no one speaking, Pudgy settled down once again. He looked at the Grand Claw. "But there are nice humans. Pudgy friends with them. They do not deserve to go away forever." The shaman wafted the burning plant material once more towards the critter, which calmed him down. "Pudgy Hedgehog, you spoke of the flying machine when you flew to the mountain. Might we hear of your travels? Perhaps we can find an answer to your problems? Please start from the beginning, if that is agreeable to you." Grand Claw. The elderly owl nodded, and Pudgy stood up. He watched as the owls started to take positions around the ground owl and the platform. They all were facing the critter and watching with expectant eyes. Pudgy remembered it was real dark, warm, and then Pudgy Mama was hugging Pudgy. Ice Feather giggled. "Not that far back." Pudgy explained that his mother lived on a farm to the east of where his human friend Cobalt lived. All manner of animals were raised there and were sold to the humans for many reasons. The man had visited the farm and picked out Pudgy to come live with him. Pudgy's mother had left the world prior to Cobalt's arrival due to her age, so his connection to the farm was not strong. The man was so kind to Pudgy and cared for him better than anyone at the farm had done so. Pudgy's explanation of the farm did not sit well with the owls, but they listened nonetheless. The hedgehog continued to explain that over time, Pudgy started to be able to understand the human. The critter could read some words on the paper and understand what the big rectangle thing said. One day, Pudgy mustered up all the courage in him and spoke to the man. The man did not scream nor run away, and instead pulled him up closely for a hug. The two became friends, and over time, the hedgehog was taught many things by the human. After a couple of moves, the man settled down, and Pudgy started to want a place of his own. Cobalt did not argue, and instead helped him find a piece of land. Then a small cabin was built, and there was much laughter and happiness. Pudgy lived close enough that he could still visit his friend, and his friend could visit as well. The hedgehog attempted to explain how the internet worked, but the owls became very confused. So Pudgy explained that a human who lived in the center of the earth was very nice, and Pudgy went to go visit him. Thus, the telling of the first adventure began, and as the critter told his story, he acted out the parts. Painted Feather's beak was open, and was shocked to hear what was under the land. It was also during the story that several more owls started to arrive on the platform. But the critter did not notice, since he was on a roll telling his story. The myriads of parliaments had sent representatives over to the Arctic owl's tree to investigate the crying, and found a storytelling hedgehog acting out on the platform. Soon more owls were arriving, and the tree boughs started to bend from the weight of the birds. Pudgy's trip to the moon and back also fascinated the owls. More stories told of the Civil War ghosts, and Pudgy's grand travel down the Great River to save the magical man from the dark god from the moon. The owls started to discuss amongst themselves, in hushed tones, so it would interfere with the story. Pudgy then spoke of the Revolutionary War ghosts and the magic stone that let Pudgy transport to places in the land. It was also the first time he met the evil demonic Kaiser. As Pudgy explained the monster, the owls all started to shriek in terror. It took a stern warning hoot from the Grand Claw to settle them down. Once the parliaments had settled, Pudgy continued with the story of the ghosts that led him to the big lake in Texas. More shadowy monsters attacked, and the battle on the lake's surface with the magic talisman and the death goddess. Then the hedgehog began his tale to Poland, with the escalating violence of the Kaiser and his demons. The hedgehog then started the tale of what had happened on this adventure so far, but it was much shorter, since he was still on it. As Pudgy wrapped up his tale, the owls were dumbstruck and deathly silent. The hedgehog had spoken throughout the entire night, and the first light of dawn was starting to form in the skies above the forest. The Grand Claw nodded. That was quite the tale. A small gray owl landed beside Pudgy and placed a wing on his head. "We were there at the camp and watched you fight." "Thank you, Pudgy," the owl said. Painted Feather bounced over to the gray owl. "You saw Pudgy there?" The small owl nodded. "Our parliament is from that land, and we have lived in the shadow of evil for all our lives. That place is proof why man must go away forever." Pudgy turned to the gray owl, but did not whimper. The little hedgehog had seen the images and experienced a small fraction of the horror that was World War II. The critter had seen the past of Rabbi Rudolph and what the German soldiers had done on the terrible night of broken glass. What the owls said made sense, and Pudgy could not help but agree that some humans should be sent away forever. The critter started to yawn terribly and watched as the owls started to disperse and fly off to the other surrounding trees. Grand Claw pointed to Pudgy with his wing. "We will talk again later. For now, we must all sleep. For obvious reasons, my ground friend. Do not go exploring. Good day to you." The large elderly owl started to flap his wings hard and then flew off to find his branch. As the owls departed, Pudgy headed to the center of the platform and took off his pack and mining helmet. The critter placed the helmet upside down so it would catch any moisture, laid down on the soft green moss, and started to fall asleep. In no time at all, the hedgehog was fast asleep. Painted Feather decided to remain with Pudgy and nestled into a nearby nook of tree branch. The shaman kept a watchful eye of the hedgehog before drifting off to sleep as well. Painted Feather would stir awake from time to time by the sound of the hedgehog whimpering. His dreams were vivid and would cause him to wake suddenly. At times, the nightmares would cause him to call out for his departed human friend, but Pudgy would settle down for another long period of sleep. The tree swayed very gently in the air and rocked every animal on it back and forth. It was late afternoon when Pudgy opened his eyes and sat up. The afternoon sun was still high in the sky and warmed the area under its soft glow. As the critter looked around, he could see the shaman sleeping nearby to him. Trying to make as little noise as possible, Pudgy opened his backpack and peeked inside. He had a cookie broken into hedgehog-sized pieces, as well as a cracker. Also was one tiny loaf of bread, which he decided to eat. Pulling out the bread, the hungry hedgehog bit into the hard crust. The interior was still soft, although a tad bit stale. The critter did not mind that while he ate. While eating, the critter leaned over and noticed the mining helmet had indeed caught the morning dew, and a small puddle had formed inside the helmet. It was not enough for a full drink, but it would help extend his water supply. Having refilled his canteen at the animal town, prior to the departure with Mr. Drew, Pudgy knew that it would not last. Perhaps the owls could carry him down to the ground, if he asked nicely. After finishing the loaf of bread, Pudgy reached for the mining helmet, pulled it up to his mouth, and tilted back to drink what water had been gathered. There was enough water for a mouthful, and it tasted good. There was a slight aftertaste, though, but Pudgy chalked it up to the fact that this forest was so close to the Pacific Ocean. Perhaps there was still a tinge of salt in the air that would be carried on the wind. Pudgy took stock of the remaining contents of his pack. A shovel, an axe, a pickaxe, one $20 bill tightly folded, the cookie, the cracker, a replacement tiny battery for his headlamp, and several small pieces of brightly colored cloth. As the critter repacked the contents and resecured the tools to the pack's exterior, He saw the canteen was still tied securely outside of the pack. He touched the container, and it was still full of water. It was during these activities that Painted Feather had awoken and was watching the hedgehog. Pudgy turned around and noticed the shaman looking at him. Pudgy woke up and was hungry. Do you want a cookie or cracker? The owl hooted softly. No, my friend. I will feed later. Your story moved something I thought had been lost in me. Memories of my past life, prior to being an owl. The hedgehog turned to face the shaman and smiled while asking inquisitively, Your past life? Painted Feather nodded. Before I was called to fly with envtuber, I was a human. I was of the Cherokee people. Pudgy was shocked and nodded while the owl spoke. I was the medicine man and would heal the sick as best I could. Though, when it is time to join the Great Spirit, I did not have a say in that matter. The hedgehog nodded once more, but raised his paw. Can Pudgy ask Painted Feather a question? Where did all the humans go? The owl looked sad for a moment, and then nodded in return. envtuber is the word for God in my people's language. He rules the skies above and all that is of creation. Gaia is the mother of the earth, and bends to his will. Many things the humans have done, and they will be judged accordingly. Pudgy nodded. Cobalt and Pudgy's other human friends were all good humans. If they are judged and pass, what would happen next? The shaman rubbed his beak with his wing tip. I cannot say for certain, but if I can cross over from human to owl, I do not see why the process would be any different. Pudgy, is this man that important to you? In time, you may forget him and move on. The hedgehog whimpered and shook his head no quickly. No, Pudgy will never forget Cobalt or any of his friends. If they do not come back, Pudgy will be sad forever. Painted Feather nodded. I felt that way once, after I first crossed over. When I was old enough to fly, I returned to my people's home to check on them. The critter looked at the shaman. What happened? The owl looked sad once more. They chased me away. Owls are bad luck, and they feel that we are associated with death. That is not the truth at all, but I was never able to explain. I instead chose to return to my parliament and did not go back. The critter walked over to the owl and gently hugged him. Painted Feather hooted softly and started to feel better. Thank you, Pudgy, the owl said softly. Pudgy released the embrace and then walked back over to his spot on the moss and sat down. Is there a way to reverse the stones, Painted Feather? The shaman shook his head no as the hedgehog asked. Not that we are aware of. I am sorry, Pudgy, but the humans are gone forever. Well, unless Gaia changes her mind, but the process to return them would be just as chaotic. The hedgehog had not thought of that, and pondered what would happen if everyone came back at once. Daily life was an interconnected set of systems, and when enough parts break down, it would cause chaos. Case in point, when a big snow would happen back home in Pennsylvania, some humans would lose their minds and panic. Multiply that by 1,000,000, and the hedgehog started to see the problem forming. The snow owl nodded. I can see by that look. You are thinking about what would happen? It would be bad. As I said, the humans will be judged, and we will see what envtuber and Gaia decide. Tonight is when the Grand Parliament begins, though some call it the Great Parliament for that matter. Each parliament will send their Grand Claw to council, as well as their shaman, to the Great Tree. The tree has stood here since the dawn of the land, and is of deep spiritual importance to our kind. The council will discuss matters and come to a resolution. At the conclusion of the council, the parliaments will return home. Where is your home, Pudgy? The hedgehog smiled warmly at the owl. Pennsylvania. It is far to the east of here, almost the other side of the land. Alabaster showed Pudgy how to use ley lines, so we could teleport to various points along the way. The bunnies helped us get to California on their airship, and then Mr. Drew drove us to Auric. Pudgy has this magic stone, he said while retrieving the tiny blue sapphire from his vest. Painted Feather nodded. Ah, an owl tear, that makes sense. There is a ley line node to the sunrise direction, which one of our parliament can take you to should you wish to return home. The hedgehog nodded and put away the stone back into his vest and secured the clasp. Pudgy sighed. What will Pudgy do? No Cobalt. No humans, no more adventures, no more yummy food, no more cookies. The hedgehog sighed wistfully till he got a bright look on his face. The owl looked curiously at him. What is it, Pudgy? The hedgehog bounced slightly. The grocery stores are full of food. Food farther than Pudgy eyes could see. No humans mean no money, and that means free cookies. The owl laughed. That is true. I flew into a store, I think it is called. The humans were quite displeased when I snatched away a stick of meat hanging from a hook. Tasted good, but made me sick. The two animals talked and laughed until the sun set, and the night skies started to form once more. As twilight continued to fade, the owls started to sound their calls. It was beautiful, with the thousands of calls filling the forest air. Pudgy saw all manner of owls flying around, gray, brown, white, black, cream, a myriad of colors and patterns. Some had long ears, some had what resembled horns, some were huge, and some were small. Eyes of gold, of yellow, of black, and of white stared back and scanned the forest. As the hedgehog was watching and waving friendly as they flew past, he heard a tremendous flapping sound. The distinctive call of the grand claw was heard, and he landed in the same spot as he had the night before. "Good evening, Pudgy. Did you rest well?" The hedgehog stood up and nodded. "Yes. Pudgy glad brought supplies, because there was no going anywhere as you said." The elderly owl laughed. "Very true. At this height, your climb would be great, and the potential to fall certain. Did Painted Feather explain matters further to you?" The hedgehog whimpered a tiny bit. "Yes. Pudgy understands that there is a chance to see human friends again in a different form," the critter said with a hopeful look. The Grand Claw nodded. "Painted Feather has a way of speaking that soothes and inspires hope. I know not if he is right in that regard, but I value his counsel. Speaking of which, it is time to go." The shaman nodded, and then bounced past Pudgy while flapping his wings. The black and white owl took to the skies and headed deeper into the forest. Grand Claw nodded. "We will be back later. Please stay here. My Grand Feather will be visiting you later." The owl calls continued to fill the air as the large white owl started to flap his wings and flew quickly from the tree platform. As Pudgy watched the large owl fly away, he noticed there were other owls heading in that direction. A familiar cry of a hawk was heard, as well as a crow, as shapes flew past the tree. The gathering of the parliaments, the murder of crows, and the flocks of assorted birds had begun. The hedgehog did not know what would happen next, but he looked forward to the upcoming visit from Alabaster. The little critter hoped that what the shaman told him was true, and that filled his heart with a tiny bit of hope. This place was known simply by the name, the tree. In the center of the section of the redwood forest where the owls had roost, stood one redwood tree that they considered to be sacred. It started to grow from seed during a time that man was just a fanciful dream. Some trees could grow up to 350 feet, but this one towered at well over 400. The massive redwood tree was a tourist attraction, and the humans would visit it to take pictures. So many visitors arrived that the forest and park services had to barricade and fence around the base of the tree. Humans, being what they were, felt the need to carve their names into the tree after getting their picture. Pesky humans were an annoyance, as the tree had survived multiple catastrophes. It had been struck by lightning, and even was clipped by a helicopter that had flown too low over the forest. As the owls flew, they circled the trunk of the tree and began to fly upwards. Almost all the way at the top was a section of trunk that had been burned out by a lightning strike. The rain had put the fire out before it did further damage, and weather over time smoothed the rough edges. The owls had chosen this area of the tree for their meeting spot. A natural flat spot had formed over time and was large enough to hold the various parliaments' grand claws. One by one, the various owls started to land and formed a ring around the platform. The shamans were landing in the center and started bouncing as they began their dancing. The burning plant material that Pudgy smelled was that of sage, and they began to cleanse the space. Some would stomp their claws, others would puff their wings, while others would call in their various tones. While owls were on the platform performing their dance, flocks of all the birds who had chosen to attend began to land on the branches of the tree that overlooked the platform. This was a grand parliament like no other, as the enigmatic hawks and eagles had arrived days before to hold their own gathering beforehand. The last time there was a gathering like this was when the humans were making mushroom-shaped clouds appear over the desert lands. Most who attended this gathering had not been born during that time, but the stories of the last Grand Parliament were passed down so that no one would forget. Ultimately, that council could not make a decision and chose to watch and wait. In time, the humans stopped making the clouds appear, though the land itself was poisoned. There were hard feelings, and many blamed the council for not acting. Though after a long time had passed, memories dulled, and the feelings began to mitigate. As the song and dance continued, the shamans were illuminating very faint white lights throughout the platform and in the branches above. They looked like tea candle lights, but were blue in color and caused no heat. The platform illuminated slowly and seemingly spread throughout the branches, as if following the path that the tree sap would flow. This caused the smaller birds to wake and began to send their calls as well. Such a noise was heard that it echoed throughout the entire forest. Thousands of owls and birds had come to the forest, who were sending their calls into the air. Without warning, the shamans abruptly stopped dancing and then bowed to the grand claws. The myriad calls all started to die down, and soon only the wind was heard as it blew through the trees as a deathly silence fell upon the tree. A huge owl, standing slightly over 2 feet tall, strode forth to the shamans. He was striped in dark brown, with tufts of white poking out around his upper chest near his neck, and huge ears that looked like horns. Yellow unblinking eyes scanned the trees as he twisted his head and body to scan the area. As the combined flocks watched, the owl raised his head to the sky and sounded a loud warning call. The other Grand Claws looked up and sounded their calls one by one around the circle. The shamans stayed low to the platform and walked silently through the spot that had been opened by the leader of the council. They walked around the platform and stopped behind their respective leader, and then began to sound off one by one as well. In the trees, the birds were doing the same, while a multitude of voices blended as one. It was the same call. The whole tree shook with a pulse of magical energy, and the bark began to emit a soft green light, which spread from roots to needles. The birds noticed, and as the calls started to end one by one, all watched as the tree's glow became much stronger and illuminated the forest around the tree. Rings of light started to form on the platform under the Grand Claws, and then under the shamans, matching the tree rings of the trunk. Once the entire platform was illuminated, the leader of the council stopped his call. In a loud voice, the leader spoke, "I am Steel Feather. Welcome one and all to the Grand Parliament. It has been many moons since we all gathered. We come together to raise our voices in song and to renew our bonds with Gaia once more. The stones of the Earth Mother have been located. The stones have been turned on, and the power of Gaia has been restored. As she promised, the humans have left this land. We can now live in peace once more. Now, let the parliaments send their Grand Claws forth, so all may hear tales of what is going on in the wake of the blight of humanity." The horned Grand Claw owl bowed slightly, and then strode back to stand at his place on the platform. A small owl that almost resembled a bird strode out to the center of the platform. It was mainly brown, but had checkered spots of white throughout its feathers. "I am Grand Claw Tallgrass. Welcome to one and all. We live to the south of here, in the few spots of natural land, surrounded by the humans' places of rock. The humans disappeared one by one, and were panicking as they went away. Fires burned as their foul homes were leveled, but the embers blew on the winds and took root in other places. We now have a problem, with fires burning our lands, but this appears to be a cleansing fire, so we are not worried currently. It would help if we could beseech you, Gaia, to bring the rain." The burrowing owl hooted and backed away to its spot around the platform. A white owl strode forth to the center of the platform, with what almost looked like an orange head, with orange stripes running down throughout her body. Pale white irises ringed around dark pupils and scanned the council as she spoke. "I am Grand Claw Warning of the Eastern Forests. Our forests are safe once more, and the humans who were cutting down the trees have left. Their foul machines remain in the forest, but we cannot move them. We think they will be fine if left alone, but it would be helpful if someone with more knowledge in the matter could assist us." The owl sounded an acknowledgement call, and then backed away to her spot around the ringed platform. A small female white owl with cream-colored accents strode out to the center of the platform. "I am Grand Claw Brokenbark, from the grasslands in the center of this land. The humans are gone. Their homes are silent. The rolling things have stopped. The big smoky places that have wires connected and hum have stopped. When the sun departs the sky, the land is dark finally once more. The stars can be seen, and my parliament is at peace. We did not support the council decision to act, but we respected the council and assisted with the efforts to locate the stones. We now see the wisdom of this action and apologize." The owl bowed almost to the ground and circled the platform to all the Grand Claws, then turned and back to her position along the ring before she stood up once more. This continued with the bard, the boreal, the long ears, the northern hawk owls, the elf, the saw-whet, the short ear, the spotted, the whiskered screech, and pygmy owls as well. Each spoke of a similar set of circumstances, with the humans having disappeared completely. The humans had these stone buildings with pipes that either sucked water out of the river and lakes or put foul water back in. The structures stopped working, and now these circular pools were giving off a terrible odor. What the owls were describing was the water treatment and sewage treatment plants. With no power, and no humans for that matter, the operations shut down. Terrible smells were starting to come out of certain human places, and the owls did not know why. The grocery stores had lost power, and the fresh food within was starting to rot. Confused pets were waiting for their humans to return, and were all alone. The owls could see their desperate looks, trying to figure out a way to get outside. As the Grand Claws spoke one by one, eventually all but two had spoken. A gigantic gray owl strode into the center of the platform and puffed out his wings, which stretched from one side of the council to the other. He folded his wings back. "I am Grand Clawstone of the Grey Owls. The groundwalkers can fend for themselves, as this council is for our kind. We have guests in the trees, so welcome my winged brothers and sisters, but it has come to my attention that the Arctic owls indeed have a ground walker in their roost. I would like to know why." The Arctic Grand Claw strode forth to the center of the platform and was looking at the gray owl's tiny yellow eyes directly. The gray owl fluffed up his plumage in a more aggressive fashion, before back into position to his spot along the platform. The large snow-white owl bowed slightly as he turned around to all the other Grand Claws. Standing back upright, he spoke in a clear voice with authority. "I am Grand Claw Glacier of the Snow Owls. Yes, our parliament does indeed have a ground walker visiting with us. My daughter and Grand Feather were dispatched by the council to summon the owls to the far east of this land. Along the way, my Grand Feather was hurt and fell to the ground. A small brown hedgehog and a silver fox arrived and took him back to their home. They patched him up and met a human who lived nearby. The human did not attack and seemed to be kind to the forest animals. As the human stood nearby, Alabaster, my Grand Feather, watched what occurred. The human felt strangely and then began to fade away before ultimately disappearing." The burrowing owl's Grand Claw nodded. "You speak of Pudgy Hedgehog. My Grand Feather Short Feather spoke of him." Glacier nodded. "Yes, but that is ahead in the story." The Arctic owl told all those in attendance of the travels of Pudgy and Alabaster to get here. Glacier spoke of the humans who assisted them and what they were like, as well as the final journey through the human lands to get to the settlement to the southeast of the forest. The owls were hooting softly amongst themselves as they spoke, trying to process why the humans helped an owl. Grand Claw Glacier nodded and waved his wings at the chattering council. While the actions of the humans were not expected, one good deed does not outweigh generations of evil. "I told this council of the stones. I told this council what Gaia said. I lobbied the parliaments. My resolve is still firm in this regard. The humans needed to be removed, otherwise we would all die." The elf owl Grand Claw raised his wing. "I am glad to see your resolve has not changed, brother. My kin overheard the wonderful story of the hedgehog's adventures last evening. I suspect a resourceful ground walker may be of use to the council, should the need arise." The other owls started to nod and hoot as they began to agree. Glacier bowed to the council slightly, and then backed into position along the ring. The other bird flocks did not have a right to speak at this grand parliament, but were invited to attend. They all started to chirp or send their calls from the tree branches that were above the platform. The hawks had noticed the tree's glow was starting to pulse, and ancient runes were beginning to form around the base of the trunk of the towering redwood tree. The shamans could feel the tree pulsing from deep within the earth, and began to dance once more behind the Grand Claws. The leaders of the gathered parliaments looked towards the center of their ring, as a green flame began to form from the tree's centermost ring. An ethereal voice called out from within the dancing flame, "Children of the air, welcome." The Grand Claws immediately recognized the voice and bowed low to the platform. The birds grew silent in the branches above and bowed as well. It was the avatar of Gaia, and had chosen her time to appear. The Grand Parliament coincides with naturally occurring forces within the planet, where the Earth Mother can manifest more easily. The owls were not aware of this fact, so were a bit surprised at the emergence of the flame. The shamans stopped their dance, and two bowed to the platform. The forest grew silent once more. "My children, you have done well. I can feel my connection to the surface restored. I feel the sway of the trees, the rush of the air through the tall grass, the water as it runs across the surface. It has been so long since I have been able to feel this. Thank you. It was as if I was in an eternal slumber, unable to wake till now." Grand Claw Steel Feather raised from his bow. "Blessed Mother Gaia, how may we be further service?" The flame avatar danced happily within the center tree ring, and Earth Mother spoke once more. "The world has been poisoned, and life has been torn asunder. It will take time to repair the damage. Fires may rage uncontrolled, floods may occur, and winter will come early. This needs to occur to cleanse the world, though some poison will take much longer to rectify. I can feel holes dug deep within me, where poison was removed or inserted. Please be safe, my children, and know that my actions are not taken lightly." The words of the Earth Mother echoed throughout the trees, as Steel Feather bowed once more. "We hear you, Mother Gaia, and will spread your word to the others." Gaia spoke once more, with a sadness to her tone. "The humans were my children as well. It pained me so much to remove them, but it was clear that they would not stop until this world had ceased to exist. While not all their kind were evil, I have deferred to the judgment of Unetlehi regarding the decision for some to return." The owls looked up in shock, which prompted Grand Claw Glacier to speak. "Mother Gaia, how can the humans return? They will lash out once more and poison this world further." The avatar flame burned brighter and extended its height. They will not be returned as they once were, but in a new form. This process will start upon the equinox of summer. Only those who are deemed worthy will return, and the wicked amongst them shall remain locked away to safeguard this world. Painted Feather looked up, his words to Pudgy ringing in his mind. It was as he had suspected. The humans would return as animals. This both made him happy that he was right, and concerned as what would occur should too many returns at once. Grand Claw Warning approached the Avatar. Mother Gaia, what if all the humans return at once in their new forms? That will cause chaos. The flames danced happily within the ring as the Avatar spoke. Once more, it will not be all at once. I sense animals that are missing within and throughout this world. The humans were the cause, so it is only fitting that they replace that which was taken. I must confer with you, Netlanahi, and the other gods of the sky. My children, take heed of my words. Peace has returned at last. Live quietly within each other, and do not make the mistakes of the humans. I am renewed once more, and will be watching. Should the world become unbalanced once more, I will act once again. Now, my children, spread forth from this place, and return to your lands. The green flame avatar slowly diminished, and returned to its place deep within the tree's trunk. The glowing green light that was coming from within slowly ceased. The runes on the ground faded, and the towering redwood tree was dark once more. Grand Claw Steel Feather nodded. Without objection, I call this Grand Parliament concluded. The other Grand Claws nodded in agreement, and stood upright once more. One by one the parliaments began to sound their greeting call. The voices of the owls soon mixed with the birds above in the trees. Two by two, the parliament representatives started to fly from the platform to head to their roosting trees nearby. Only Grand Claw Glacier and Painted Feather remained at the platform, as they watched the flocks of birds start to fly off once more. Painted Feather strode up beside the elderly owl. It is done. Grand Claw, what will we do now? Grand Claw Glacier nodded. We will return to our tree at the sunrise of the Grand Mountain. I want to take our hedgehog friend with us. He has an owl's tear, which we must show him the way to our tree, so he may return if we need to use him once more. Alabaster speaks highly of the hedgehog, and I believe we may need him in the future. Gaia spoke of changes to this world, which has me concerned. For now, let us return to our temporary roost. Painted Feather nodded, and followed behind the Grand Claw. The two owls flew from the platform, and through the surrounding trees. The flocks of the various birds were already starting to depart. Some owls were also flying off, but Glacier and Painted Feather found their tree full of all manner of parliaments. Alabaster and Pudgy were in the center of their platform, acting out a scene to something. As the two owls flew down, they landed on their tree's platform and waved their wings at the hedgehog. Pudgy waved, but was still talking. He was telling a grand tale of how he flew to the moon in a rocket. The owls were fascinated and asking all sorts of questions. The Grand Claw was expecting to be asked about the parliament, but was not, as the Arctic owls had forgotten about him. Glacier laughed and looked at Painted Feather, who was ignoring him also, engrossed in the ground walker's story. Pudgy was acting out how, when he hopped on the moon, he actually flew a fair distance. It was due to the moon having less gravity, which then led to an explanation of what gravity was. The hedgehog described the dinosaurs, their spacesuits, and the gigantic domes in which they lived. All manner of creature, big and small, living in harmony under the watchful rule of a Tyrannosaurus. Tiny elf and pygmy owls started to nestle up against Pudgy, as they had become scared. Pudgy hugged them one and all, and then continued his tale. The mischievous gray aliens and the dark god Dagos, the big battle in space, and then the desperate return trip back to the planet, and the long recovery time to reacclimate to this world. Even Grand Claw Glacier was getting in on the fun, and asked questions as well. Once the story ended, all the owls hooted happily and flapped their wings. Grand Claw Glacier laughed. Excellent story, Pudgy. Now, may I speak? Pudgy scampered over to the spot where Painted Feather slept the night prior and sat down. The hedgehog soon was joined by a couple of pygmy owls who nestled around him. Many sets of eyes then turned to watch the Grand Claw. My brother and sisters of the air, the Grand Parliament has concluded. We spoke to Mother Earth Gaia, and she has informed us that the world is now healing. It is time for us to return to our lands once more. Your Grand Claws will tell you of what was said in further detail. We will be leaving soon to return to our tree to the sunrise of the Grand Mountain. Pudgy, we would like you to come with us. The elderly owl said with a smile of sorts in his beak. The other owls started to hoot, and small voices called out, No, we want Pudgy to come with us. No fair, we want to hear the stories. Painted Feather laughed. We are not leaving immediately. We have time for more stories. Do we not, Grand Claw? The elderly owl laughed and nodded. allowing Pudgy to go back to his storytelling spot. The hedgehog then began telling his adventure stories once more. The owls that had stopped by tonight were not able to hear the stories the night before, and word had spread throughout the parliaments. As Pudgy told the tale of his steamboat adventure to New Orleans, the grand claws of the elf and pygmy owls arrived and listened for a time. They had shown up to gather their straggling owls, but stayed to listen as Pudgy and Argenti, the silver fox, battled the dark god Dagos once more on Lake Pontchartrain. There were many protest hoots by the small owls as they were rounded up and flew off to join their parliaments. Soon there were only Arctic owls left, which led the Grand Claw to signal the end to the story. Ice Feather landed beside Alabaster and hooted in greeting to Pudgy. The hedgehog waved and then started to pack up his things. Putting his backpack on, he pulled the straps tightly around his body. Once properly secured, the little critter checked for his magical sapphire to see that it was still safely in his vest pocket clasped shut. The hedgehog put the mining helmet on and then walked to where Ice Feather was standing in front of Grand Claw Glacier. Painted Feather strode up opposite to Pudgy on his right side. "Everyone, it is time to return home. May I ask who will be carrying Pudgy?" Painted Feather raised his wing. "I will, Grand Claw. I need to educate him on how to properly use the owl's tier." The Grand Claw nodded. "Everyone take flight and fly safe. We will return to our tree and see what our land looks like now." The hedgehog watched as the various Arctic owls began to take off from the tree branches and began to fly to the east of the tree. Painted Feather took flight, circled back, and then snatched up Pudgy by his backpack. Once more the critter was being carried beneath an owl. This time he did not cover his eyes, because it was so dark out he could barely see anything. He tried to stay as stationary as possible as the owl flew, though he would lean with the owl to the left or the right. The light started to increase as the redwood forest thinned, and soon Pudgy could see a meadow. It was bathed in moonlight, and everything had a soft azure hue. Painted Feather called out, "In the center of this meadow is a ley line stone. The lines are fragmented, but connect to various points in the land. The magic stone you have is called an owl's tear by humans. We call them the stone, and when an owl comes of age, he or she is given one. The stones allow access to the ley lines and allow travel over great distances. They can also teleport without using a ley line, but there are limits to their powers. I am going to dive now, so please do not move too much." Pudgy watched the owl start to circle and then dive bomb straight down over a large boulder that was sticking out of the ground. The scared critter started to yell in terror as the ground was coming too quickly towards them. Before he knew it, the rock started to glow bright yellow, and then whoosh, they were back into the ley line. The hedgehog looked up and saw the owl's wings stretched wide. They were moving very quick, and Pudgy could feel air flowing past them. Perhaps because they were flying, this ley line seemed to move so much faster than the others. The hedgehog would ask the shaman when they were safe once more. Faster and faster they seemed to move, with the rocks whizzing past them so fast he could barely see the details. The colors began to swirl around them, a mix of yellow and orange light, before suddenly a dark circular exit appeared in the distance. Bracing himself, the owl exited the ley line and shot out from the ground straight up into the much colder night air. Painted Feather banked hard and then leveled off. The shaman heard a funny noise coming from Pudgy. "Are you all right, Pudgy?" The little hedgehog's tummy contents had been expelled when they exited the ley line. Pudgy threw up, but Pudgy is getting better now. The owl laughed. "Yes, the ley lines are not for the faint of heart or full of stomach. I believe Alabaster told you. We only drink water before using the ley lines. It is better to hunt at the exit than be full at the entrance." Pudgy could see a flickering light that illuminated a sign that read, "Packwood." The little hedgehog wiggled slowly as he pointed. "This is Packwood. This is where the nice Sandra lady and her husband Raymond brought Pudgy. Pudgy flew by-wing airplane to the mountain from here," the hedgehog said with a happy tone. The owl hooted. "It looks like the town is deserted." The two animals watched from overhead as most of the town lights were off. The land was dark, save for a couple odd lights that were running off solar batteries. As Painted Feather banked to the left, they started to pass over the runway of the airport. There were a couple of planes that had crashed into the ground. It looked like fires had burned, as there were black rings of debris around each crash. Planes crashed. Pudgy hoped no one was inside. The little hedgehog whimpered as the owl continued his flight. After they had crossed a silently moving river, they were in thick forests of a myriad kinds of trees. Higher and higher they flew into the night sky, as the moon darted between the clouds. Painted Feather sounded a greeting call, and soon was joined by several other Arctic owls. The group continued to grow, and soon the entire parliament had gathered to fly in a quasi-formation. The Grand Claw was in the front, leading the others to their home. Painted Feather started to narrate once more. Our home is a forest of trees with green needles. We used to live above the mountain, until the humans came with their machines of death and sorrow. They took the trees and burned the lands. When it rained, the dirt washed away and left only rock behind. Not even the ground walkers could live there. Well, save for the snakes. Pudgy listened and continued to hold on as his paws were starting to tingle. The straps were cutting off the circulation in his limbs, so he really hoped the flight would be over soon. It did not, and the flight continued for a long time still. The owls banked to the left once more, and were flying up a river that was flowing from Mount Rainier. The night sky continued to stay cloudy, masking the moon, and causing the features of the lands below to stay hidden. Pudgy could only feel the air grow continually colder as they flew to a higher elevation. The Grand Claw sounded a loud greeting call, which caused more owls in the trees to call back. Painted Feather sighed happily. Home. The hedgehog dangled from the pack, and had lost all feeling in his limbs by this point. Pudgy felt the owl bank hard upwards, and then soon he was dropped gently onto a moss-covered nook of a series of tree branches. Pudgy immediately curled up into a ball, and his quills went straight out. The tiny backpack was sticking straight up in the air. This reaction drew curious looks as the owls began to land in the nearby branches. Alabaster landed beside Pudgy and gently touched his quills. The young owl looked at the shaman. "You broke, Pudgy?" The shaman immediately got flustered and stammered out, "I did not do anything. Pudgy, are you all right?" Alabaster laughed and watched as the hedgehog started to uncurl and wiggle his nose at him. "Is it safe now?" Pudgy asked while wiggling to get feeling back into his limbs. Alabaster nodded. "Yes, it is, Pudgy. Welcome to our forest, in the shadow of the Grand Mountain." Pudgy yawned terribly. "Good. Pudgy glad. Can Pudgy go to sleep now? Pudgy tired?" The Snow White Owl nodded. "Yes, Pudgy, take a rest. It is only a few moments till dawn. We will discuss matters later." The hedgehog nodded, and his eyes involuntarily closed by themselves. The exhausted critter immediately fell asleep, wedged into the nook of the tree branches. The shaman wiggled his wings at Alabaster. "Did I break, Pudgy?" "Humph," the shaman grumpily said, while flying off to the tree which he usually resided in. What the hedgehog did not realize, that this was the Grand Claw's tree, and while owls would visit, they did not normally sleep there. An exception was being made for the ground walker, and Glacier watched from his perch over the forest. The morning light was emerging from the direction of the sun's ascension. As the elderly owl saw the sun appear, his eyes fluttered closed, and sleep arrived. Both hedgehog and owl slept soundly in the cold forest, and despite the sun rising to shine over the forest, the temperatures did not get much warmer. It was due to the elevation, with spring resembling an average winter to Pennsylvania. Around some of the tree trunks, there was still some snow in the shadowy places, which kept a slight chill to the air. The trees of this forest were green, however, due to them being predominantly pine trees. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Pudgy did not stir awake in his sleep. The sound of the swaying trees on the cold mountain air and their general movement rocked the hedgehog gently while he slumbered. The nightmares had finally subsided, and he dreamt a dreamless sleep restfully. It was not until the later afternoon he stirred from his slumber and saw the light of the sun passing behind Mount Rainier. The owls were still nestled on their branches, with the Grand Claw quietly watching with his soft golden eyes. He noticed that Pudgy had stirred awake and raised his wing to his beak. Pudgy nodded and stayed put quietly while stretching a bit. As quietly as he could muster, the hedgehog started to undo the straps of his backpack and slowly took it off. The critter's stomach was rumbling bad, so with the stealthiest of movements, Pudgy was able to set his backpack in front of him to open it. Inside was smashed pieces of a cracker and a cookie, so the critter's paws reached inside and started to munch. While eating, Pudgy saw that Alabaster was sleeping on a branch above and beside his. His hurt wing was still not folding correctly, but it seemed that with the movements as of late, it was healing. Ice Feather was sleeping beside him, as well as a couple of other smaller Arctic owls. Painted Feather was sleeping below the Grand Claw's perch. After finishing the cracker, Pudgy turned to the cookie fragments. It was a ginger snap, which was famous for storing well during trips. The hedgehog really wished he had some hot tea to dunk the hard cookie in to soften it, but he was glad he had it. The sun was continuing to set, which was both darkening the forest and causing the owls to stir. Painted Feather was first awake and noticed the hedgehog was eating something. The hedgehog waved and nibbled on his fragment of cookie. The critter decided to save a couple pieces, just in case he needed them. While looking inside of his pack, Pudgy saw the contents were quickly disappearing. The hedgehog would need to resupply soon, if he were to stay for a longer period. Unlike the night before, this evening was turning out to be a cloudless night. The stars were out already, as the twilight faded and the temperature started to drop. The hedgehog started to check his pack contents once more, and the pieces of fabric he brought could be fashioned into something to warm him. The little critter got to work, fashioning out a poncho of the pieces of fabric. Thankfully, he had packed a sewing needle and thread. Though the hedgehog was not a good tailor by any stretch of the imagination, Cobalt was only slightly better, and they would go to the nice human lady next to the flower store when they needed help with sewing. The owls were fascinated by what the hedgehog was doing, and soon saw him put on the strange covering. It was too thin for the area's climate, but it was better than nothing. Painted Feather's curiosity got the better of him, and quickly flew over to land in front of the hedgehog. He pointed with his left wing tip. "What is that, Pudgy?" The critter smiled and wiggled his nose. Pudgy cold, so needed to make temporary clothing. Pudgy stay inside when cold out like this. Cobalt used to make special clothes for Pudgy for adventures. The critter said, and started to whimper sadly, as he began to miss his friend once more. The hedgehog sniffed his nose hard, as he shook his head. But those days are gone now. Pudgy must learn to be by Pudgy self now. The little hedgehog said as he shook away the sadness from his mind and body. The hedgehog started to describe his underground home, and how Cobalt had helped him build it. The nice man had also made a cottage for our Jenny the silver fox, who also used to live around here somewhere. There were 2 wild and crazy, but loving gray fluffy bunny rabbits, who lived in their warren up the hill from him. 2 field mice also lived across from the rabbits, and 2 beavers had their pond along the stream. The little hedgehog spoke highly of his friends, and the many times that the brave and kind Mr. Bear had saved the day. As the hedgehog told his latest story, the owls all were listening. Pudgy's home sounded wonderful, and when Alabaster joined Pudgy on his branch, he verified what the interior of the home looked like. There were many pouting smaller owls nearby, upset that Alabaster was able to go inside of the hedgehog's home. The description of Pudgy's phone, with a little rectangle, which had people inside, confused and delighted the owls. The stories continued through the evening, until the moon rose high in the night sky. The Grand Claw sounded a greeting call, which quieted his parliament. "As always, my quill-covered guest, your stories are fascinating. I would like to discuss why we brought you here. I know it is cold, and we will soon return you to your home, but please allow an old owl some patience." Pudgy in his poncho nodded, and sat down on the branch. His backpack and mining helmet were placed once more onto his back and head, since they helped him also retain heat. Grand Claw Glacier nodded. "Pudgy, thank you for helping my Grand Feather, and assisting him in returning to our parliament. While I do not foresee it at this time, we may need assistance from you once again. The owl's tear, which you have in your possession, is given to each owl of the parliament when they have reached age. Painted Feather has instructed you in how to properly use the stone, and based on your stories, I believe you were partially doing this already. However, you asked the stone to take you places you had not gone, and it took you there. This confuses me, and delights me, since that means that you have a greater mobility than our parliament. If you accept, I would like to include you within our parliament. Is that acceptable, Pudgy Hedgehog?" The little critter listened, as the moonlight illuminated the Arctic owl. Pudgy rubbed his chin with his paw, and then raised it. "May Pudgy ask a question, please?" The Grand Claw nodded, and Pudgy spoke. "If Pudgy needs help, can Pudgy ask for assistance?" The Grand Claw nodded. "Yes, any member of the parliament may seek aid. We are few, but will assist as best we can. Although, if you find another Kaiser monster along the way, we will politely decline. I do not know how to build a plane." The owl had trouble sounding it out, but then hooted as he laughed. The hedgehog stood up. "Yes, Pudgy would like to join your parliament then." The other owls started to sound happy calls, and Alabaster wrapped his good wing around Pudgy to gently hug him. The Grand Claw nodded. "I am happy to hear that you accepted our invitation. Now then, we will tell you tales of our land and of our parliament. Then Painted Feather and Alabaster will take you to the ley line node that is near to here, which will allow you to travel home. Alabaster knows the way there, and he will be given his stone soon, so if we have a need for you, my Grand Feather knows how to get there." Ice Feather hooted. "But don't fly into that tree again, son." Alabaster looked sheepish and called out, "Well, I will just have to go visit Pudgy again then." That statement caused the little owls to pout and hoot in protest. "We want to go to Pudgy House too." The adult owls laughed, and started to hoot and dance happily on their branches. Painted Feather started to dance upon the storyteller's branch, and began to tell his tales. Everyone quieted down and listened, and many owls started to snuggle around the shivering hedgehog. Hours passed, with Painted Feather telling all manner of tales. Tales of how owls came to be in this world, to tales of their parliament's travels. Their territory was primarily around Mount Rainier, but sometimes they would cross into Canada. The little owls were all nestled around Pudgy, who was not shivering as much now. As the shaman ended his latest story, the little owls hooted happily, while Pudgy cheered. The hedgehog had learned so much since meeting Alabaster, but the call of his home was weighing on his mind. The little critter was conflicted, since he wanted to go home, but he also wanted to stay. Ultimately, the Grand Claw made that decision when he taped his claw on the tree branch twice. "And now you know of our kind Pudgy Hedgehog, and we know of your kind. I believe it is time for you to return home. Alabaster, if you will, can you please take Pudgy to the ley line node that is nearby to here? Painted Feather will accompany you there as well," the Grand Claw said with a clear tone. The 2 owls nodded and bowed to the elderly leader of their parliament, and the little owls started to hug Pudgy. The hedgehog returned their embraces and said his goodbyes, strapping his backpack on tight once more, watched as both snow owls leapt from their respective branches and took flight. Pudgy, realizing he needed to make things easier, positioned himself in such a way to make the backpack easily accessible by his traveling companion. Alabaster banked around the tree, and with his claws extended, grabbed hold of the pack and lifted Pudgy from the branch. There were many goodbye calls from the owls in the surrounding trees as Pudgy was carried off. Even the Grand Claw waved and gave a goodbye call as well, watching his grand feather fly in the direction of the shaman. Once more the little hedgehog was dangling beneath an owl and starting to wish he could fly. But that was not possible, as hedgehogs could only bounce and scamper. Thankfully, this flight was not long at all, and soon he saw a large white granite boulder sticking out of the ground. As Alabaster glided in, he released his claws and dropped Pudgy onto the rock, gently. The Arctic owl landed a short distance past Pudgy and then turned around to walk back towards him. The moon was bright in the skies above and cast a pale white hue over the ground. Painted Feather was standing nearby, looking up at the moon wistfully. Alabaster looked a bit sheepish as he folded back his wings. Pudgy, I must admit something to you. When I first came to your home, I did not know what to make of you. But without hesitation, you healed me as best you could, and then leapt into the unknown to assist me in returning home. Pudgy, I wish to thank you from the bottom of my heart. The owl bowed low to Pudgy, but that did not last very long, as the little hedgehog pulled him back up and gently hugged him. Can Pudgy call Alabaster a friend? The owl looked happily at him with his gold eyes and returned the embrace. Yes, Pudgy, I would very much like to be your friend. Painted Feather was trying very hard to not pay attention until he found himself being hugged by Pudgy as well. The shaman hooted a laugh. Yes, Pudgy, I want to be friends too. I believe everyone within our parliament agrees with that as well. Now let me instruct you once more how to properly use your stone. Painted Feather explained, while acting out certain parts, that the ley lines were interconnected. In some cases, when he would exit one node, Pudgy could launch himself into the air. By concentrating on the stone, the node could be opened in the sky above the stone. Even a jumping motion could cause him to fly into the air at the exit, so the hedgehog would have to be careful. It was possible to use the owl's tear to teleport from one point to another directly, but it would cause the sapphire to tire much quicker and would need time to recharge. However, by using the ley lines, there was no such restriction. Pudgy listened intently, and once the lesson was over, hugged the shaman once more. The hedgehog scampered over to hug Alabaster again, and then out to the middle of the granite boulder. Pudgy waved his paws at his owl friends, who waved back with their wing tips. Goodbye, Alabaster. Goodbye, Painted Feather. Pudgy going to go home now. The little hedgehog took out his sapphire and held it tightly in his paws. Mr. Stone, can you take Pudgy back to the grove of trees where Alabaster and Pudgy left the forest? The shaman hooted happily and watched as the boulder began to glow with a bright green light. There was a tremendous flash, and then the hedgehog disappeared. The area slowly stopped glowing, and the two owls were left alone. Alabaster looked to the direction of the rising sun. Does this ley line go all the way there? Painted Feather rubbed his beak. I am not sure exactly, but it will get him a fair distance there. Come, Alabaster, we should return to the tree. The two owls turned back to the setting sun direction and took flight once more. They would head to the Grand Claw to advise of Pudgy's departure and what was discussed. As Painted Feather flew, he wondered what else would Gaia have in store for the world. She mentioned the world would heal, but just how exactly would that be done? Fire destroys, but in some trees, it is necessary to release the seeds which allow new trees to grow. Time would tell what would be in store for the owls and the other animals. Meanwhile, Pudgy was flying quickly through the vortex of swirling green energy, with no owl companion with him. It seemed like he was flying much quicker through the bedrock. The little hedgehog could see a black circle appearing in front of him, and as it approached, he could feel cool air blowing towards him. Remembering what the shaman told him, the critter decided to try it out and started running towards the exit to gain speed. When Pudgy just reached the edge of the exit, he jumped as high as he could. As the shaman instructed, the critter was shot out of the granite boulder and went flying high into the air, holding onto the stone as tight as he could. Mr. Stone, take Pudgy to the next node, please. The stone grew warm in his paws, and he saw a beam of purple light start to come out of the ground. With the angle he was flying and then falling, he quickly entered the new node. Once more he was in the ley line and traveling at a tremendous rate of speed. Pudgy followed this pattern to travel from Washington State to Wyoming, then to South Dakota, then to Wisconsin, then to Michigan, and once more to Pennsylvania. During his brief flights in the air, the critter saw glimpses of what had happened to the country. The towns and cities were dark. The skies were dark save for the stars and moon. The lands were quiet. Each jump to the east was also causing the twilight to increase as he headed east. It was during the last ley line trip that he did not run towards the exit, pondering to himself. This was most likely what the owls were doing. No wonder Alabaster got hurt. If he shot out at an angle from the node, once more a dark circle appeared at the end of the vortex of swirling red light, and the hedgehog popped out and landed hard against a tree. The little critter recognized the grove of oak trees that grew in a circle around the boulder. Pudgy had made it back to his forest, and he tucked the sapphire away in his vest. As the critter clasped the pocket shut securely, "Thank you, Mr. Stone. Pudgy, promise you can rest now," the critter said while his eyes adjusted to the morning sunlight. His forest was much warmer, so he no longer required the poncho. The large granite stone ceased its glow as the portal closed and the node powered down. Pudgy wonders if this is how Angeliki gets here. The little critter bemused to himself as he got to his paws and started to scamper through the exit between the oak trees. Excited, the hedgehog started to scamper as fast as his little paws and legs could carry him. In what seemed like an eternity, the hedgehog made it to Argenti's cottage. Stopping at the door, Pudgy began to knock excitedly on the door. The hedgehog knew it was early still, but he wanted to see his silver fox friend first. There was no response, so after a couple of moments had passed, the critter knocked once more on the door. This time, he heard movement inside the cottage, and Argenti sleepily peeked through her round glass window. When she saw Pudgy, she opened her door and started to whimper. "You left me behind," the female silver fox said, loudly while pouting. Before she could get another statement out, the hedgehog immediately ran into her home and hugged her. "Pudgy, sorry," he stammered out while he began to whimper. The two friends embraced silently, aside from the occasional moment of crying. Pudgy sniffled while he hugged her. When Alabaster and Pudgy got to Texas, Pudgy wanted to go back. Alabaster said that would have had to jump back and forth on each leg, since only two can use the stone at a time. Argenti really wanted to try and be upset with the hedgehog, but she could not. She did very much want to hear what had happened, and why Pudgy was dressed in cobalt blue bandana handkerchiefs in a strange manner. "I am glad you returned to us, Pudgy. I was so worried," the silver fox said while looking down at him, and released their hug. The hedgehog was not injured, which also added to her sense of relief. "Did you find out about Cobalt and the other humans? Were the owls able to help?" As Pudgy was about to speak, he heard a sound from the clearing outside. Due to the racket coming from the clearing, the door to the bunny's warren opened. A sleepy gray fluffy bunny poked his head out and wiggled his nose sniffing. Spotting Pudgy, the quickly wakening rabbit hopped out of the warren and bounced excitedly. "Pudgy's back, everyone!" The little bunny called out while hopping over to Argenti's cottage. The second fluffy bunny shot out of the warren and fell onto the ground in front when she tripped. The field mice door opened, and they started waving at Argenti's cottage. The bunnies and field mice quickly made it over to the fox's cottage and waved at Pudgy. The little hedgehog turned around and exited the cottage dressed in his makeshift blue poncho. Pudgy hugged his friends one by one, with much bouncing as well. After he had greeted all his friends, the hedgehog moved to a spot where everyone could hear him. Argenti poked her head out of the cottage and wiggled her ears at the assembled group. The hedgehog started to tell his grand tale of everything that had happened. The trip to Texas through the ley line, and the meeting with Mrs. Waffles. The short ride in the truck to the island, where Alabaster and Pudgy took the next ley line to the desert in New Mexico. The wild and crazy antics of the nice talking cacti, and the rescue by the airship bunnies. When Pudgy got to the part about the bunnies, his story was immediately interrupted by excited gray and fluffy bunnies asking questions. As the hedgehog explained, clarified, and re-explained various parts about the bunnies, the story continued with the flight over the desert. The beavers had spotted the gaggle of animals up at the silver fox's cottage and had decided to come take a look. The hedgehog was at the part during the airship's riverbank landing and waved at the beavers when they arrived. Pudgy took a moment to go over the parts of his story the beavers missed before heading to the next part. The airship had drifted off course and was over the city of Montclair in California. Vast swaths of human structures as far as the eye could see, and few if any green spaces anywhere. This led to more questions, including from Argenti. California was so developed, concrete was everywhere. All the animals wondered how things grew there and where the animals lived. The little hedgehog continued his story and how the airship headed to a lake with a narrow strip of nature growing around it. They landed in between the trees where there was a tiny village of animals living there. As Pudgy described the buildings, including a beaver woodworking place, the critters' minds started working overtime as they thought about the little town. Argenti was the first to sigh wistfully, "I wish we had a little village like in Pudgy's story." The hedgehog stopped and rubbed his chin with his paw. "Well, if you think about it, we already have the start of one. Maybe we could have our own, but let Pudgy finish story first." The critters all started to laugh, bounce, and listen happily. Pudgy started to speak again, with about the departure from the village and meeting the kind human by the lake. Pudgy spoke highly of his friend from social media, Mr. Drew, and how the man drove them all through the night northwards to the coastal town of Auric. Pudgy described the darkness of the cities and how empty the whole place felt. The people on the radio were losing their minds when they were able to broadcast. Pudgy started to whimper while telling his story when he got to the part where the nice man disappeared in the driver's seat. The animals grew quiet and wiggled their noses, realizing the humans really were gone from this world. The hedgehog took a breath and looked around the forest while sniffing the air. The critter sighed and then spoke about how Alabaster's mother ice feather arrived. The trip to the roosting tree in the vast redwood forest and the thousands of owls perched within the branches of the trees drew mystified looks from his animal friends. The hedgehog described all that had happened, the gigantic Grand Claw Glacier, and the other owls he met on the tree. Pudgy told tales of the great beaver dam that had been built and the various bastions of animal lands that existed before the arrival of the humans. The stories Pudgy told lasted through to midday, with his audience enraptured with the grand tales. Argenti had heard some, as she once lived in the general area where the Arctic owls lived, but most of this was new to her. Pudgy was not allowed to go to the Grand Parliament, but what he could hear from his tree was sign enough that something big was going on. Thousands of owls and birds all sounded a warning call at once, and then the massive redwood cedar tree started to glow green, with a beam of light that extended into the skies above. In time, the Grand Claw and several other owls returned and explained what had happened. The humans were gone forever and would not be returning to this world as they were. The critters all started to sniffle, as this meant their human friend Cobalt was not going to be coming back. But before outright tears started, Pudgy raised his paw and mentioned what the shaman told him, that the humans may come back as animals, and if that were to occur, it may be as soon as summer when that might happen. Argenti blinked. Cobalt could come back as an animal? I hope he comes back as a fox. She giggled before the bunnies pouted at her. No, we want Cobalt as a bunny. Then he can hop around and play with us, they said in unison while twitching their noses at her. Pudgy chuckled and wiggled his nose while he looked thoughtful. The little hedgehog had not thought of this until now and wondered how the humans would return. The sliver of hope that Cobalt and the others may come back filled the hedgehog with a tiny but growing sense of happiness. Pudgy hopes all human friends come back, but Pudgy hopes Cobalt is first. Pudgy wondered if that means he could live in Pudgy's house all the time. After lots of laughter, bouncing, and arguments about what animal Cobalt should be, Pudgy continued with his story. The Grand Parliament concluded, and soon Pudgy was being carried by the shaman as they flew through the ley line. The owls arrived over the town where Pudgy had flown to with Sandra and Raymond. Like the other human cities, it too was dark. The only sources of external light were a few spotlights that had been connected to solar panels. The owls flew to their great forest on the eastern side of Mt. Rainier. Pudgy was so exhausted, he slept all day in the tree. At night, it grew cold, so he had to fashion together the poncho he was wearing. The hedgehog told more owl tales, and then the return trip through the ley lines. The critter explained how if he jumped, he could shoot out of the ground. This captivated the bunnies, as the hedgehog had figured out a way to go higher than they could. Then Pudgy was back home and went to Argenti's house. The critter started to hug everyone once again, which drew lots of giggles, as the hug everyone part was the best part. Argenti had managed to sneak out of her cottage and shut her door during the tales and was sitting on the ground, looking around the circle of friends. Pudgy was right. They already had a village, but since Cobalt was gone, they were now on their own. That thought made her sad, but saw Pudgy had his pondering look in his eyes. Pudgy, what are you thinking? The female silver fox asked as she wiggled her ears. The hedgehog looked up. Pudgy thinking. No Cobalt means no food, no repairs, no protection. We are on our own for real now, so we must be careful. Mr. Bear can help us, but he lives far away across the forest. Even at our Jenny speed, it would take a while to get there and back. Pudgy needs to think about what we need and how to make it. If a monster were to come, we can use the Pudgy house to keep everyone safe again. Oh, Pudgy need to check on home, the little critter exclaimed, as the thought crossed his mind. The other animals bounced and formed a parade line behind Pudgy as they scampered through the woods. Down the hill they went, into the secret tunnel buried underground during the Kaiser monster attacks, and out the exit to meet our Jenny. The silver fox no longer fit in the secret tunnel, so she took the long way and ran. She giggled and stuck out her tongue at the bunnies. Beat you here. The bunnies pouted, but followed Pudgy to his home, past the big round doors of the meeting room, past the round kitchen window, and to the round front door. The little hedgehog undid the secret lock and then opened his front door. The hedgehog scampered inside and found the home to be safe. The air was stale, and it was very stuffy inside, so Pudgy started opening the windows. His animal friends all started to enter one by one, and then began to bounce happily. The hedgehog took off his backpack, poncho, and mining helmet. Setting them on the kitchen table, he turned to his friends. "Pudgy, very glad to be home," the little hedgehog said with a sigh of relief. His home was warm and full of friends. Thank you for listening to Pudgy's story. Coming soon, the next exciting tale of hedgehog adventure, Kodiak Queen.